I have a genetic break that I am one of those guys that does not respond to hallucinogens.
Really?
Big disappointment.
Wow,
I mean,
that
I grew up in the
sucks.
60s, so,
Nothing?
Nothing.
Not even weed?
No, weed? What are you talking about? That's like
marijuana edibles or nothing like that?
THC, God, no,
Wow.
But I'm talking about LSD.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm talking about LSD. I'm talking about ayahuasca.
Mushrooms.
MDMA, mushrooms, nothing. Nothing. Oh, I might, this, it's so subtle, it's difficult to tell if it's the effect of the hallucinogenic or if it's just
placebo.
Me wanting it to be the effect of the hallucinogenic. So colors on occasion seem to look a little bit brighter, but it's such a
high tolerance
disappointment,
You showed up to the podcast with 16 cans of energy drinks, bro. We got about 2,000 milligrams of caffeine sitting on the table right now for those of you out there watching. Are we recording yet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
We're talking really fast, both of us.
Yeah, we're fired up today.
But hey, we're drinking goat fuel.
We're drinking goat fuel, and I'm drinking goat fuel, and I'm drinking this stuff. This is the first time I've ever had kratom.
Yeah,
white rabbit
careful how
kratom.
you say that.
My buddy Egon sent me this stuff. I've never had kratom before, but I'm going to see how it works because I didn't get any sleep last night, as I told you.
Yeah, I know.
Well, with all this remote viewing stuff, have we been able to figure out, can we use that remote viewing to figure out who built the pyramids?
No.
Damn it.
Because you don't have any empirical evidence. You only have anecdotal evidence. I mean, could you get a team of remote viewers together and work that in the blind as a target? Yes, you absolutely could, but it has to be done correctly. You have to have a team. They have to be isolated or insulated from the target or the target data or the purpose of the target, and they just get a limited target briefing. And so in the blind, either CRV or ERV, they do their work. They capture their sketches, so they have verbal, visual, sensory data that they perceive, and they can have, in a good session with a trained viewer, they can have upwards, if they go all the way through stage 6, they can have 45 to 65 pages of data.
Wow.
And so they can have several hundred or exceed, pushing 2,000 data points. And then the process is trying to take the data points of all the viewers and see how those cluster together, because what you're trying to get is you're trying to get patterns established. You're going to see clusters of data that match, and then you're going to see highs and lows and outliers that they're still counted as data, but you give them less statistical significance. And when you put that picture together, then there has to be a program manager, which is typically me these days, sitting down and assembling the data to create the picture. So when you see what we're doing on History Channel, on Beyond Skinwalker, you're now seeing what are called enhanced aggregate sketches and all those kinds of things, because we're taking the sketches and the components that are coming from all the viewers, and the producers are looking at it with me and going, yeah, this, and yeah, like we want that, and this one is meaningful to us. Because let's face it, not everybody is a good artist, even as a remote viewer. Some are far better than others, and it's always the ones that are good sketch artists that, people perk up and look at. But having been a guy that's taught so many people for so many years, I look at them all and see value in all of them. And I don't care if somebody is able to draw a very elaborate, box, and somebody else can barely draw a square. I mean, to me, as an evaluator, an analyst in that respect, they work. But now what we're doing so that we don't have individual viewers laying claim to what shows up on air, because that is not what I want done. I don't want that, and they do that. So if they see the show airs, they're firing up the social media and going, right here at 16:29, that's my sketch. It was a group effort. It was a team of 70 viewers or a team of 35 viewers, and everybody provides valuable input. So it's important just to understand how we're doing and what we're doing it, and understand that with that, we can give a lot of really good information. And in this case, with Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, it ends up being information that they really like because it gives them an answer, even if it's, right? If it's an anecdotal answer or a team-derived answer or a visual, because they have so many unknowns there when they're doing this research. Like, why is that happening? I don't understand that. This gives their viewing audience at least some version of what it might be. We're not ever going to say it's accurate or I mean, that it's absolute or that's what it is.
Yeah, it doesn't pass the scientific method, but it's still fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it won't let you down as long as you follow the rules of it. It won't. So
I just got to imagine if I was you and I had spent decades in these top secret remote viewing programs, I would have wanted to know who built those pyramids and how can we at least go out and get some anecdotal sketches, or just like, let's just get 5% there to the answer, even if we can't get the full scientifically proven, answer.
Sure.
How would we do that if we wanted to?
You assemble a team.
And do you know how do you decide how far back in time you go? You assemble a team.
It's all based on your concept. So it's all based on, if I'm playing program manager, it's up to me to establish, remember the event arc of time we did in our last? Okay.
Absolutely.
It's up to me to establish where that center line is in the event arc, where that main event point is. So and you also have to remember,
you have to pick a specific place and time.
Yes. You can look across the arc, but the broader your target, the broader the timeline, the more scattered will be the data, because different viewers will start to access and perceive information along a different signal line anchored to a different piece of that event arc of time. Okay. So some of them may see it when they're laying a foundation. Others may see it when they're, laying the top corner, stone on, or something else. So you need to pinpoint to a specific time, make that your concept, and make it very strong. Mm-hmm. And that's how you assign the coordinates. They are based on the concept of the target in the mind of the individual assigning those coordinates.
So if you picked a target of, say, 20,000 years ago on the Giza Plateau, at where the Great Pyramid of Giza is located right now, you would be able to hold that in your mind and somehow aim these targeters, or you're the targeter, but you would aim the viewers towards this specific time and location, and then they would come back to you with scattered data. It may not land on exactly 20,000 years ago. Some of them might be 15,000 years ago, or...
Yeah, exactly. That's the theory of how it works.
And what do you tell them specifically?
What you tell them, especially when you're doing it in the blind and you have them isolated, you give them a target briefing, and you will say, if you have a really experienced remote viewing group, they've gone through CRV, ERV, and they have years of targets under their belt. Mm-hmm. You could give them kind of a limited front load. And what that means is you could say, this target is backwards in time. You don't want to do that to new viewers because it starts their imagination rolling, and they cannot get out of the way. They will run over themselves throughout the entire session because backwards in time, So then they immediately start going to period costume and other stuff. You have to be careful with it. It's why the isolation, working in the blind, limited front loads to only experienced viewers, or if there's a purpose in giving a limited front load, but something like that. And I think 20,000 miles will put you back in the dirt. I don't think anybody
20,000 years.
20,000 years. I don't think anybody was there at that time. So, I mean, we're only talking about 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago.
That's when they think that they were built.
Yeah. 20,000 years ago?
No, they think they were built 2,500 BC.
Oh, okay. Well.
But I've I don't know how
That's what.
deep you've dove into it, but I've had
So
people
4,500 years ago.
so that's like the academic accepted Egyptologist theory on it. But we don't have any evidence. The only tools that we have evidence for 2,500 BC is stone chisels and pounding stones. So there's another hypothesis that a lot of really smart archaeologists and historians and researchers have come up with, that those things are far older and they existed before 12,900 years ago, when there was a cataclysm, it was either a solar event or a comet event, where there was a series of comets that hit the Earth and wiped out most of civilization.
More likely the comet.
And then the idea is there was a far more advanced civilization here, more than 13,000 years ago, that was responsible for all the megaliths that are built. And that comet cataclysm, which is called the Younger Dryas hypothesis, wiped out that advanced civilization and kind of like hit the reset button on civilization, and then basically sent us back to the Stone Age. And then you have like the Egyptians that were there writing hieroglyphs on these massive megaliths. And those hieroglyphs, they're not perfect. They look like they're carved with copper chisels. Like, it looks like toddler's work compared to these perfectly symmetrical 100-ton granite blocks that exist. So a lot of people are hypothesizing that those pyramids were way, way earlier than 2,500 BC. So that's why I'm so fascinated by the idea of remote viewing back there, because I want to see what the fuck was going on.
So then just picture the intricacies and how that experiment has to be set up. You have to start at a fixed point in time, right? And see what the viewers produce around that point in time, and probably work several episodes, several targets on that, looking for patterning of data, repeat data, etc. The viewers aren't told anything. They just work the target again and again, and you can assign different coordinates to the target. But you're doing it all around a fixed period of time. You're trying to develop the most significant portrait of what is there based on their verbal and visually sensory data that they pull out. The emotional data, intangible data, all of those things that they are going to pull out. And as well as colors and temperatures and textures and tastes and sounds and smells, energetics, the dimensionals. You were looking for simple contour sketches. You're looking for textural sketches. And as it goes on, it becomes more elaborate, and they start to get more detailed. Now they're going into stage 3, and it's getting more elaborate. They're starting to be perspective. Those that can, you end up with foreshortening and all kinds of other things in the sketches. And by the time you get to stage 6, now it's geospatial sketching. Now what they're doing is pulling together everything that they have detected, decoded, and objectified from a visual perspective, and a verbal sensory data that supports the visual, and visuals that support the verbals, and they start to assemble a big picture. And after you did 3, and I suggest 3 because then you have some statistical relevance by having that kind of sampling from that group, and you're doing it 3 times at the same target, but you're changing the coordinate of the target, but the intention of the target stays the same. That will probably sound confusing to you, but just trust me. You're sending them back into the same swimming pool, so to speak, but you're basically putting them in, telling them to get in different places.
Interesting.
And what they would come out with then paints a picture, albeit anecdotal. You can measure it against whatever known quantifiable attributes are available from an archaeological perspective. And then you would have to give them some time to shake it off, and then your experiment continues. Now you may want to go back 1,000 years. So the intention of the next target series is back 1,000 years. Same place, back 1,000 years. Now, theoretically, and having done it, it'll not to the degree we're talking here, but it would get back, you would go sliding back incrementally to the point where it wasn't there anymore. Right?
Right.
You get to the place where it doesn't exist, or you get to the place you're trying to find the edge, the edge in the time arc where the construction begins.
It's like you're blindfolded, like trying to feel around the room to figure out what's where.
Yeah, except you're seeing with non-physical eyes. You're perceiving. They perceive textures, and it all depends on. It depends on their modalities of perception. There are a number of modalities of perception. You can be tactile, you can be auditory, gustatory, you can be visual. There are a bunch of different things that are in there that they can be. And they all they start to find out in their very first CRV class what their primary modalities of perception are and what their non-primary modalities of perception. For example, I'm a visual audio. So I can see elements of the target. It's like looking at it like through broken green glass is the best way to describe it.
Like Minority Report.
Exactly, like a Minority Report. This was exactly what I was going to say. That's the best remote viewing movie that there ever was.
Unintentionally, or do you think they knew?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea. But they had 3 precogs. So what's the first rule, in remote viewing? Or second rule, rather, you never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of other remote viewers, meaning you have to be a team. If you're trying to use one person, nobody is accurate all the time. So then you have no way of knowing unless you're trying to calibrate them and track them over time and know on calibration targets like test targets. So you can tell whether they're going up in their curve, in their performance curve, or coming back down again. And then you can, if you know they're coming up and you can see their rhythm for when they're good and when they're bad, then you pull them off and only put them back into the problem when they're on the upswing before they hit the zenith and start back down again. Everybody does that. Every aspect of your life can be looked at in that way. Nobody has the same thing, the same performance, the same cognitive skills, the same levels of emotion, perception. Nobody does in everything that we do, whether it's driving to work in the same road, in the same car every day. Some days you are better than you are other days, right?
Yes.
It's true in anything that we do.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true in the performance of remote viewers, which is why, you heard me last time we talked, I said, if somebody's telling you that I am always, at the highest levels of accuracy. Bullshit, bullshit. And I can prove it, I'll set the experiment up and I'll prove to you and the public that you aren't. So anytime you hear that, you should just dismiss it as brio.
How do you determine who's a good psychic and who's not a good psychic?
The ability rests in all of us. It's not who's good and who's not. All of us have this inherent ability. Remember, that was one of the deliverables when SRI received the sole source contract from the CIA. Was the first deliverable, and I'm distilling these down because there were lots of deliverables, but the 3 main things that they were asked to do was prove scientifically that this psychic ability, or that, just this extrasensory perception exists in human beings. Prove it scientifically that it does, or prove it that it doesn't.
But you couldn't, right?
No, they did.
Oh, they did.
That is exactly what SRI did. And they came back to the CIA and said, yeah, our experiments, and we have done everything. We can work blind, double blind, and do all these different things. And our data allows us to conclude that this is an ability. It's real, and it can be harnessed and honed and used. The CIA, being the CIA, always keeping, somebody between them and the problem, if it ever arises, are not going to just take one sole source contractor's, version of that. They actually brought in 2 different auditing agencies. I think one was Pear Labs, and I think that the other was SAIC. And they came in to review SRI International's data, to review their methodology, to interview researchers, investigators, analysts, et cetera, to see for researcher bias and all these other different kinds of things. They came back and validated the data, but there were some comments made, which I would fully expect, because for one, there's probably a little bit of envy from those other research agencies that are now acting as auditors, because they all had their own kind of sort of the same program, but they didn't get the CIA contract. So now they're being asked to look at the guys that did get the CIA contract as a sole source, which always pisses other competitors off. So they probably had to be a little nitpicky, and there were probably some legitimate findings and recommendations about how to change some of the experiments to make sure that there was no investigator bias. I know that one of the early processes in which they were using, which is kind of where the coordinate remote viewing came from, is they were actually using lat long.
Really?
Yeah. They were using lat long and
latitude and longitude.
Latitude and longitude, which becomes a literal address on the planet's surface. And the problem with that is people who work with latitude and longitude enough, when they see a latitude, when they hear a latitude and a longitude, they can immediately index where that is. Sailors, pilots, anybody that navigates by latitude and longitude, if they do it long enough and you toss that to them, they can go, oh, I know where that is. That's South China Sea. Yeah. They know where it is because it's quite literally a grid that's thrown over the Earth's surface that they can now they memorize it, right? So, I mean, they may not be exact in the minutes, but they are exact in the latitude and the longitude, and whether it's north or south, they can calculate that. It's just rote memory that comes to them. So that was a criticism. And so then the issue was, okay, if we're not going to use latitude and longitude, are we going to use grid Mercator, which is what the Army and the Marines use? Anybody that's a ground force, they use grid Mercator. And that divides the surface of the Earth up into 1,000-meter grid squares, 100-meter grid squares, 10-meter grid squares. So if you have a 10-digit grid coordinate, it's like down to a 10-meter square, or a 10-meter square. And that, again, would have created the same problem. Over time in the experimentation, it would devalue the results because you were giving them something that they could immediately, at the speed of human thought, start to piece it together. And anytime you started giving them grid coordinates which were in the same area, then they're going to, as soon as they hear the grid coordinate, they're going to know where it is.
Right.
And that was the other problem, is that the vast majority of their targets in the experimentation process were right there in the Stanford, in the Palo Alto area. So, it didn't take long for some of the test subjects to figure that out. Like, one time it's Stanford University, and the next time it's some library, and the next time it's something else, and it's something else. But, the buildings sort of looked the same, the roofs looked the same. So there were lots of things. They didn't yet understand how they needed to change the gestalts of the target around. They needed complex gestalts, not simple gestalts. They needed to change the area, not keep sending viewers back into the same area, and then qualifying the data as good, because after a while, there's less work doing the detecting, right, decoding and objectifying, and more work just imagining and creating. So it destroys the results. And that was a criticism, and I thought was well-founded. And that is when actually the concept of this 2 sets of 4 numbers came about, which was really, Targ and Puthoff had nothing to do with that. That came from Ingo Swann. And that was what was actually taught to the folks that were in the unit when it opened at INSCOM. They had 10-digit grid coordinates. SRI was still using lat long or some other coordinate system, and they kept saying that there was no way anybody could figure that out. because they had a random number generator that told them, which box to open and pull a target envelope out. So there was no way they knew. There was no way the test subject knew. But it was just, I just think they should have changed it the way they were told to change it. And I think eventually they did, but that was a tough change for them because they really thought as physicists that they had created a foolproof process of keeping the test subjects in a blind situation or a double blind situation. But as long as they were going to use actual coordinates, it was like giving an address that somebody could eventually figure out where it is. It's like police officers or taxi drivers or ambulance drivers. If they hear an address in their city, they know where it is, right? They know right where it is just because they memorized the city.
Who was that? I was just reading Annie Jacobson's book, The Phenomenon, and when she was talking about Uri Gellar, there was a guy who discovered Uri Gellar in Israel. I can't remember this guy's name. I think he was a psychologist and a philosopher. Uri. No. I can't remember the guy's name. Do you know who I might be talking about? The guy who discovered Gellar. He talks about the different levels of consciousness, how there's the human level, and then there's above that, there's another level, and there's another level where everyone is connected, like consciously connected.
Well, the thing I like about Uri that I always want to tell this story is that he was an Israeli paratrooper,
right,
who fought against the Arabs and was wounded. And when he came out of his army service, then he started building, this. He started learning to be an illusionist and do that kind of stuff, and that's when he started into it. I don't know who found him or discovered him there, but they did bring him into SRI. SRI with Pat Price, Uri Gellar. They had Ingo Swann. And I know that Tony Robbins.
Oh, yeah. We talked about this.
Yeah, Tony Robbins said that they brought him there as well. He stood up on a stage with 4,000 people in the audience and said that that's what he did. So I don't know who the guy is that discovered him.
I know you know who this guy is. God damn it. It's going to drive me crazy.
Uri, he has done some funny things, man.
Yeah, the spoon bending shit is unbelievable.
I want to think it's a trick. I've looked at it very carefully, and I cannot.
Have you seen him do it in front of you?
Yeah, the first time I ever met him.
This is him.
We were on the book tour together.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
We were, we were both on a book tour, and I was in Portland, Oregon, and I was on the Danny Bonaducci radio show.
Oh, yeah.
And that was crazy. I'm out waiting in kind of the green room. It's not a green room, and Uri's in being interviewed, and when he comes out, before they swapped guests over, Uri came over and introduced himself, said, I'm looking forward to your book. I've got this thing I want you to, I'm going to have my producer contact you for the Sir David Frost show that we're going to be doing. And he goes, no, by the way, let me bend a spoon for you. And so he pulls a spoon out of his pocket, which he keeps some spoons in his pockets all the time. And I looked at him. He was literally 18 inches from me. I was looking right at it. He put his left foot against the copy machine. It was a big office copy machine. I just was looking at everything he was doing. He put his left foot against that machine like he was stabilizing something. And all he did, because I watched his hands and I watched the spoon, and he started rubbing it, and the bowl started dropping as he was rubbing it. And then he just grabbed it and twisted it like that, and then pulls out a marker, a permanent marker, and signs the bowl in the inside of the bowl. And he goes, here, we'll be talking to you. I was like, and if it was a fake spoon, then the spoon he handed me that was bent that he just signed, because it never left his hands. He just,
Right.
And I looked, I watched him do it.
Didn't you say he would do this at restaurants too?
Oh, yeah.
He would literally walk up and grab someone's utensils off the table and just bend
all
the
the
spoon.
time. Yeah, he would do that. He would, and of course his kids, who were amazing, and his wife and his brother-in-law Shippy, they'd just roll their eyes because he would. If somebody recognized him in the restaurant, he would walk over and bend the spoon right in front of them. He would take their soup spoon or a fork or anything else right off their place setting and bend it right there for him, and then, sign it. And people loved him for it.
Steve, I just emailed you a video. It'd be cool if we could show this to Dave and get his opinion on it. This is a guy I found who he was. His name is. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bubs. Bubs Naturals is a badass company that has collagen, peptides, it has coffee creamer, has coffee, electrolytes, and they are amazing because they are a tribute company to a Navy SEAL and former CIA contractor Glenn Bubs Doherty, who died defending American freedom in Benghazi, Libya. Again, there is obviously no shortage of collagen products available on the internet, but I support Bubs because it is not only a superior product, but they support American veterans by donating 10% of all their proceeds to veteran organizations and 100% of their proceeds on Veterans Day. Bubs collagen peptide packets are easy to use as a daily supplement. I keep them in my truck and I drink them on the way to the gym. It's flavorless, easy to mix nature, makes it easy to mix into anything. I prefer mixing it in coffee. You may not know, but after the age of 25, your natural production of collagen starts to fade, which can severely impact your skin. And an interesting thing about collagen is the more you supplement with it, the more your natural production increases. Since I started using it a few months ago, I've already noticed a huge improvement in my joint connective tissues, my skin elasticity, and the overall quality of my hair, believe it or not. You can support Bubs and this podcast by visiting bubsnaturals.com and using the code DJP at checkout for 20% off your first order. Again, that's bubsnaturals.com and use the promo code DJP at checkout for 20% off. It's linked below. Now back to the show. Itzhak Bentov.
Oh, Itzhak Bentov. We
Yes.
talked about Itzhak last time. Itzhak Bentov is a really famous Jewish physicist who the book he wrote, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, is probably one of the greatest works of just lay physics, for people that he created so that people could understand what a holographic matrix field is, or a holographic universe. So you could understand entrainment, so you could understand the electrostatic field surrounding the earth.
Yeah.
He coined these simple, crazy little phrases, these explanations for people. It said, we're just all raisins in the jelly, in the
Yes.
jello. And if one raisin is vibrating at a higher frequency, at a higher, stronger amplitude, and at a higher frequency, soon all of the other raisins in the jello will begin to resonate in that way. And the only way they can't is if they can overpower the amplitude and that frequency. And if they can do that, and they can have a constructive or a destructive wave interference, they can overpower the other wave. But otherwise,
Overpower the other wave. What do you mean by that?
if you're producing, when we're talking about frequency, we're talking about the number of waves in a given measurement, right? So if the frequency is low, like 25,
Okay.
or high, like 250, okay? 250 is a much higher frequency. There's more power in the same space. So it's more dense. It has a higher wave impact. It hits more times,
Right.
theoretically,
Okay. Yeah.
right? And then if the amplitude of it is twice or a third more than the amplitude of the other wave, what that more powerful wave, the higher amplitude and the higher frequency, will do is, if this other wave is there, that higher wave will have a destructive waveform against it. It will basically, in lay terms, crush the other wave and then cause the other wave to sympathetically resonate with the more powerful higher amplitude and higher frequency.
Oh, wow.
And that's what, Itzhak's model for that was just talking about raisins in jello. And it sunk in for a lot of people who didn't understand the physics of it, or the quantum mechanical versions of it, or anything else, or how that went to quantum mind. And him doing that and writing that book, I know a lot of physicists that have told me I became a physicist because I read that book.
Really?
I fell in love with physics because I read that book. It's still out there, Stalking the Wild Pendulum.
Yeah, Steve, play this video. This video is fucking incredible.
So the question I want to ask you is, where do you see us now in that evolutionary development?
Let me draw what is called a bell curve, which looks somehow like this. It's being used in describing random events. The bulk of the population today is this intelligent, more or less intelligent biped, all right? And with a vertical spine.
That's not a physics.
And
That's not physics what he's talking about.
Okay.
Et cetera, et cetera.
It's just
Now,
statistics is
there
what
is
he's
some
showing you.
backthrow. That is, there are some people here in this area, very few people who are still gorilla-like. That is the reality. They beat their chest when they see their neighbors and a few other things. And then we have other people who are here in this corner, very few of them, who are very highly developed, because we say that evolution is now pushing mankind in this direction, away from the gorilla types towards the very highly evolved people. At this point, we're here. What's going to happen maybe 1 million years from now, 500,000 years from now? This curve is going to shift. It's going to shift like this. That is, the bulk of the population will be very, very highly evolved. We have gone away altogether from the gorilla types, no more gorillas. And what we have here now is the average man is now the retarded person in evolutionary terms.
What you could get away with
The
back
bulk of the
then.
population is extremely, very, very highly evolved. And the cutting edge of evolution here, these are very, very highly evolved people. We can't even imagine what kind of person that will be. He may not have a physical body at all. What's the habitat, so to speak, of this group here? Well, you just go out and you find them. They're all over
He
the
was
place.
freaking this guy
The
out.
habitat of this group here.
Uncontacted tribes
what do
on
you
the
think-
left.
Yeah.
What do you think you find these people here?
I suspect you would find them in universities. You'd find the people who are very bright,
Oh.
people who are in the leading edge of professions. I mean, it's an intellectual thing.
Well, I suggest that you find them in mental hospitals, in nut houses. And the reason for that is that these people, they live in a different reality, in a reality which is very changed, and few of them are adapted to live in this reality. So naturally, they can't function very well.
What do you make of that?
Well, I have been caught saying the very similar thing until in one of my classes at the Omega Institute, there were about 5 psychiatrists that were there, and I was talking along those same lines, and I don't know if I got that from something I read from him. I honestly don't remember where or how I started thinking like that, but I was saying that, that these people could possibly be defined as thinking on very high levels, and they're just not fitting into society because society isn't at that same spot, and they have not transformed, and they're dealing with, if you're looking like right now, I mean, we're seeing a diminished capacity for people to listen, because you've got an entire generation, anybody coming up from 1995, growing up in social media, they're spending 8 hours plus a day in social media. Been a number of peer-reviewed studies out, and they're reshaping. It's reshaping their mind, and it's reshaping their ability and their habits to cognate. So, and they're very impatient if people aren't answering things in sound bites or being very quick about it, get to the point kind of thing.
Right.
And if that's where we're moving toward, and then you have other people that are operating outside, their mind is detached from the physical, and they're constantly into this matrix field, holographic matrix field, the collective unconsciousness, You know, they're thinking and working and they are detecting, coding, and objectifying. What they might be writing would be perceived by those within the physical world as just plain gibberish, you know, ridiculousness, that kind of thing. So his statement that people, when they evolve to that point, and you still have in that bell curve that was there, you still have this very thick element of the norm,
The
right?
majority of the population.
Right. And these are on the tip of human exploration, even though the norm doesn't understand that. He's correct. They would probably be ostracized. I doubt very seriously, particularly in the trending of just how we are. I mean, rise in narcissism, rise in, you know, the rise of the con man.
Right.
It is the rise of greed, the rise of more with less, faster. I think if what he's saying, it was very foretelling of what we're kind of looking at right now. Not to, you know, piss on everybody that thinks that way, but it's not doing us any favors, and there's no end in sight. And now the biggest trend I can find that I see, which is just fucking frightening to me, is that everybody now wants to have AI do their work for them. Right?
Yeah.
They want AI to do it. They want AI to write their course descriptions. They want AI to write their, you know, their letters and to do the other stuff for them. We now want AI in warplanes, AI, you know, in war vehicles. We want AI in tanks. We want AI driving warships. And we're putting less and less people and entrusting more and more to AI. I'm scared to death of some of that because, I mean, I understand that it's here and we have to deal with it. We have to face it and understand it's there. And those that were in those positions of authority need to make sure that there are safeguards in place so that we don't make autonomous weapons entirely autonomous, so that when they're flying around, they decide what they're going to attack and kill. And right now, that's where it's going, and everybody that's doing it, the thing is driving it for them because these are contract weapons developers that are doing this in support of the military under large contracts. Yeah. And so greed drives that process, right? It's not a cautionary...
And competition.
Exactly. It's not a cautionary process or procedure. They are going full tilt to make that happen and make theirs smarter and more autonomous and allegedly more trustworthy. It's really freaky. I mean, I'm concerned. I mean, it's kind of a shift in the gear, so just allow me this. It's like the Chinese have something like 700 million CCTV cameras in their country now. And they are tracking even gates. They can track the gate, meaning how somebody walks. And they're memorized. This is all being memorized, processed up by AI. It goes into the big computer system. And you know what they called the computer system that runs all of this? Skynet.
Stop it.
I'm not kidding you. Skynet. Can you believe it?
It's actually called Skynet?
It's called Skynet.
Like that's how, like the Chinese, there's not like a Chinese translation?
Well, I don't speak Chinese, but it's Skynet is what they
Google
call
this
it.
Shit. Oh my God, I can't believe this.
Yes. And you can't, even if you hide your face, if you walked around in a gorilla mask, their system, if they had already recorded you and you then walked through a crowd with a gorilla mask on, it'll measure your gait and it will identify you by how you walk, how your arms swing. That's what it'll do. And it's the scariest thing. There you go.
Skynet is a system of surveillance cameras and facial recognition software in operation in 16 Chinese provinces. It is used by public security to identify citizens in public and reduce crime. The cameras are linked to criminal and national identity databases. Holy shit.
All is not good. All this definitely
this has been
not good.
No, this has been an underlying theme in like the last handful of podcasts that we've done. And, it's crazy that the majority of the money and the top minds in this country, and I'm assuming most other highly developed countries, are going towards this kind of shit. Like the quote unquote blue sky research where they're saying, here's $1 billion, figure out the most wacky sci-fi shit you can come up with, is what that money goes to these programs, to these people like DARPA or people developing AI and that 3D mapping they did in Afghanistan, where Andy Jacobson has that book, First Platoon, where they went out and they literally they did this 3D mapping of all the towns in Afghanistan. So they had like a virtual reality walkthrough of every single place there.
Awesome. I mean, as a special operations officer in the Rangers, if somebody told me I had to go in and take out a target or go in and affect some sort of a rescue mission, the idea, instead of now, trying to get the engineers to build you some sort of a plywood mock-up, which were always dog shit.
Right.
And then you're out there trying to go through the walkthrough and you're kind of hoping that the distances between the buildings are appropriate, because in this mission like that, if something is 100 feet away and you've been rehearsing it at 10 feet away, kind of screws up your timing of things, right? So it gets people killed. Maybe the hostage, maybe the target, maybe Rangers or whomever else is there. Mm-hmm. So I like the idea that they're doing that, but yeah, that's freaky, that they can pull that up and then they can put, virtual reality goggles on and then do this.
And some of the, the technology that we see in the consumer space is always 20 years behind what's going on in the military world and DARPA type research.
It goes. It's hard to give it a timeline. I like to say 20 years or 10 years. You have to. It's just when you're talking about black projects. Mm-hmm. Every black project probably has 10 variants of that black project. Mm-hmm. And that's 10 variants of different contractors that are working on it. And there will be maybe out of those 10, 9 go to patent. They get a patent. And out of those 9, there could be 6 that are actually patents that have the U.S. government's name on it, the Navy or the Air Force or something else. And then you won't see any of those black project patents. That goes in a totally different category. It's not there for public consumption. But as they whittle away at these different projects, all of them supposedly heading for the same objective, right, to create something, what'll happen is they'll start to unplug some of them. And when they unplug them, they go into what is called a gray project status. And that's when you start to see Popular Mechanics and Aviation Weekly and, What's Next in Space. You start to see these magazines start carrying artist conceptions or pictures of a vehicle, and they start talking about it. It's because it's already been considered a dead project. Mm-hmm. That means that the others are steadily improving and meeting their gates in development and researching and testing. So they continue. And I assure you, you will never see those unless you see them flying around or doing other things, which they are all the time. I mean, I just did a podcast, with Sean. I did another one with...
shout out to Sean Hazlett. Go check out his podcast. We got to get him some, show him some love.
There's probably, of the UFO UAPs that are being reported, if you look at where that all started and you look at the plotted number of sightings, reported sightings, it corresponds exactly with the start of the space war, not the space race. The space race was the space race to the moon started by Eisenhower, carried over by Kennedy, set down the 10 years in this decade, we're going to go to the moon. Mm-hmm. That was the space race. space wars started in 1945 by the then commander of Chief of Staff of the Army and a physicist who recognized that, Clausewitz was right. The nature of war is never going to change. Only the manner and the place in which war is fought will change. And the next war was going to be fought in the dimension of space. So here you have now an Army aviator 4-star general who is smart enough to say and declare in December of 1945, as we're ending the war, that the next war will be the next big war, the next big dimension that we need to control and protect ourselves in is space, orbiting this planet. That is when we started. They were not, I guess the Air Force was 1947 or 48, so 2 years later they all dropped the Army pinks and greens and they start wearing Air Force blue. And the Air Force was the big budget carrier in all of this. The Army tried to compete. They dropped off, about 10, 12 years later because...
The CIA was competing with the Air Force too, weren't they?
Well, the CIA was augmenting the Air Force. They're two different tracks, but they're certainly both involved in the space war. Mm-hmm. The CIA's, their objective is intelligence collection. Mm-hmm. The Air Force wants intelligence collection, but the Air Force is an action arm. They're there to blow the shit out of stuff and kill the real or perceived enemies of our nation, and to be capable of killing in space other satellites. They knew that the Russians were going to parallel them. In fact, if you look at the timeline of that, it is almost identical when there's just a slight edge in the timeline where the Russians are a little bit slower and getting off the mark. But the space war started right then.
These space war ideas, is this something that we got from the Nazis?
I don't know. I've not ever in my research drawn a connection to that. I know that there are a lot of things that the Nazis were working on that we had no idea they were working on them, and we had no idea they were as far along as they were. But how freaky is it to show up in U.S. warplanes, which are piston-driven, and have, Nazi warplanes, which are jet-propelled.
Right.
That had to be a really freaky experience if you were a fighter pilot up in the air, seeing that and seeing the speed of it. You probably had to think it had to be some sort of an alien vehicle, right? They had no idea what that was. I am sure, look, everything is cumulative. And there's no single one thing that one country is doing that drives the United States to do something. The Nazis were defeated. Technology was being made. We were being made aware of technology. But there was also the great fear of the Soviet Union and the start now of the Cold War and what China was going to do. And so the intelligence communities, what the Nazis were working on, that's now a defeated army, and we're just busy trying to help rebuild that country. And yeah, we would look at that and there would be some lessons learned. But would that be the cause for us doing that? No, I would dispute that. No. Was it something that maybe caused us to think that, well, if they knew that and the Russians got half of the, of the intel from out of Berlin, then they probably know that as well. So they're probably doing that. So we're doing it. And it wasn't because it came out of the Nazi occult or Nazi or anything else. It was just a technological awareness that's there that lets us now know that that's possible. And if it's possible, we have to assume they're going to do it, meaning the Soviet. And we have to assume that China is going to do it. And therefore, our job is to protect our country, and we can't allow that kind of technology, which we're going to develop it because we're going to take it. And we already probably had people exploring it, but they, remember, were under pain of death, pushing people through the development cycles to make these things happen and not being willing at all to accept failure. So they pushed the envelope and they got there faster as just a matter of survival. because they knew that if they didn't start developing these newer, more prolific weapons, that it was going to be, they weren't going to win. So I don't think it was the cause, but it certainly would have contributed to the entire global perspective of how the technology that changes the way we fight wars is going to be there. That's the role that would have played as far as I'm concerned.
Right. I mean, the reason I ask is because I know that we got the idea of this psychic stuff and the psychic arms race that started during the Cold War came from the Nazis, specifically. I know Himmler was very much into this stuff. He was really into like the occult and this esotericism and all this stuff, and some of those ideas are what we took, and we assumed that the Russians got that too, and that's what started these programs initially.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that a good place for the listeners to start is if you really want to have a really good rounded read on Nazi ideology and the occult, I say get Nicholas Goodrich Clark's 1985 book called The Occult Roots of Nazism. It's there are lots of books that are out there, but that I have found is probably the most definitive work of breaking down Nazism and its ties to the occult and why and what was actually done. And it had far less to do with a lot of things we might think it had to do, because one of the points made from researchers that look very carefully at Nazism and the cult is that the occult and Nazism and its ties to Nazi ideology is greatly exaggerated and very poorly researched. And so, Goodrich Clark's book, having read probably 8 or 10 books on the subject, I just found it to be the one that was most well-grounded, most well-researched, and really tied it back into it. You go to the Das Anhänge, and you start looking at that, and I know that there have been people that are drawing conclusions about that thing, but it's essentially a collection of papers that are divided at this juncture into 4 major categories.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Verso. Have you ever tried fasting or intermittent fasting? If so, you may be aware of the sizzling energy and mental clarity that you get if you do it long enough. The scientific data validating the health benefits from fasting for weight loss is overwhelming. But what doesn't get talked about enough is the longevity benefits you get from fasting. When you fast, your body turns on all its defense mechanisms to help your body hunker down to fight off illness and disease. But the problem is it takes 3 days of starving yourself to activate this process. Scientists like David Sinclair have recently discovered molecules to help your body turn on this process without having to fast. If you've ever heard this podcast before, you've heard me talk about Verso many times, and I've had world-renowned nutritional scientists like Dominic D'Agostino on the show, who is the guy who actually introduced me to Verso, and I've been taking it every day for the last 3 years. Cell Being is always the first thing I take in the morning after dragging my carcass into the kitchen, which wakes me up and gives me energy. I even use it for pre-workout. And Clean Being is the product I use every night before bed. After taking Clean Being for some time now, I have actually noticed a huge improvement in not only my hormone regulation, but my vision has improved. I know it sounds insane, but this stuff actually can improve your vision. My lipid regulation has gotten better. And another huge thing is all of a sudden, I don't get affected by all the pollen in the air. I don't have any of these reactions. And Clean Being has actually been scientifically proven to alleviate these things. Other clinical trials have proven healthier skin, less inflammation, healthier hair, lipid regulation, enhanced cognitive function, and improved metabolism. On top of that, Verso always publishes third-party testing on each batch produced to guarantee you're getting exactly what you pay for. So if you want to check out Verso and support this podcast at the same time, go to ver.so/Danny and use the coupon code Danny at checkout for 15% off your first order. Again, it's ver.so/DANNY and use the code Danny at checkout. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
And one is at the Atlas of German folklore. And it's exactly what that is. I mean, I read through all of the letters and all of the translations of those letters, and it is pretty innocuous. It's them trying to fulfill what Himmler was really charged with doing at Hitler's behest, which was capture our Aryan roots and where our language started and how it evolved and our music and our art and our, our people, and trace our blood back to its origins and all those things. And that's what that atlas of German folklore was about, was putting dots on the map in Europe to trace that, is what they were trying to do. And you go into the Britain nationalism, which is the other category, it's just doing very much the same thing, only it's tying it into other parts and nationalities in Europe. Now, the last one, the Norwegian project, the fourth one, I'm leaving the third for next. The fourth category, the Norwegian project, was a collection of letters that had been translated. There are still more that are being translated, but it was the Norwegians, as you know, were occupied by the Nazis during World War II.
Right.
And they hated the Nazis because of that. I mean, they hated them. And they wanted nothing to do with the German occupiers. And you had the head of this group was there trying to get an organization so that they could get Norwegian scientists to work with German scientists on the issues of culture and language, and they wanted to create like a blended scientific effort to do things there. And the Norwegians were like, yeah, go fuck yourself, because you're blowing up all of our archaeological sites and then you won't let us be there.
The Nazis wanted to look like them.
Yeah, and they weren't having it. So it was just a series of letters of bitching and moaning and going back and forth and reporting to Himmler and, to the director of the Anthrax, that, oh, this didn't work and they're not playing. And then, quotes from the Norwegians that they didn't say, go fuck yourself, but that's what they meant. They were like, we're not doing that with you, right? We're not doing it with you now, and we're not going to do it with you after the war. We don't like you, essentially. And they had no intention of coming together with him. But then there is a category which people might be referencing, and that is called the Dowsing Project. So the Dowsing Project is precisely what it sounds like. It was dowsers, it was dowsing rods, it was pendulum work, and there was also a subcategory in there that dealt with astrology. And it was stated in a number of the letters there that the intention was to develop dowsing as a technique to find oil and gas and mineral deposits. And then there were other, even much more loosely based intentions for the use of dowsers and dowsing rods and pendulum work for military and economic projects. Now, all of that was being discussed, but here's the funny thing, is that this Wolfram Sievers, who was the managing director, and his accomplice, which was this Walter Wust, who was the curator of the Anthrax, meaning collecting objects and items and anything that had anything to do with what this project was working on. Mm-hmm. These guys spent the vast majority of their time trying to deal with the security police and the Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, because they were running around trying to find pockets of people that were working with the occult and arrest them, because they did not want that. Himmler was tied into that, and Hitler may have had some tie into that, but those two agencies, the security police and the SD, and the this Bureau for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, were arresting dowsers, confiscating their dowsing rods and all their materials and everything. It was written, everything in their studies, all of it. And so that whole section not only exposes the work that was being done by different kinds of departments and groups that were working with the NHB or not, but they were trying to collect They were trying to build manuals. They were trying to build training programs. They were trying to perfect the use of training dowsers and then the use of dowsing rods. And these other agencies were just literally beating the shit out of them and shutting down their efforts and confiscating their stuff. I can't imagine the disconnect that was going on there, because this is in 43 and the war is not going well.
Right.
Two fronts, they're getting their ass kicked everywhere. And now a lot of the things that were part of the Nazi ideology that are being, Hitler was no longer really taking a big front seat and pressing some of these things. He'd pass that off to Himmler, like he passed a lot of things off to the rest of his henchmen. And Himmler was trying to do this. Himmler was still deep with the SS into the occult. But the idea that the occult was going to be spread through the entire Nazi program never flew and was never part of what they were doing. That was SS, and everybody else was trying to shut them down and get them. But, these parts of this, these subcategories of this, like they went through all the dowsing literature after it had been confiscated. They had to go through the dowsing literature.
What does dowsing mean again?
Dowsing is the use of metal rods. Thank you for asking. It's the use of metal rods, and a dowser holds the rods, and they typically hold them like this. There are other techniques, and the rods are L-shaped. So you have the little rod handle, piece of wire. Let's just say piece of wire. And it comes up and it goes out. And every dowser has their own theories about what metal works best for them. Some use brass, some want aluminum, some want steel, some want, bent coat hangers will work, right? Any kind of material will work. It's like the preference of the dowser. But I don't know what the Nazis were doing, if they had standardized this or not. I would suggest they probably were trying to do it. But the dowser can hold these rods, and they can, if their intention is dowsing for water, if they move over an underground source of water, the rods, which are pointing straight ahead, will move and cross. And that is the point where the water is located there. Let's talk about how that works. There are lots of theories, but the theory that has always worked best for me is one of physiology. When they're holding these rods and their intention is to find the water source, there could be an electromagnetic at play here. There could be. But there is also the idea that the subcutaneous connective tissue in our bodies, just under the skin, that it responds to what the head is perceiving, what the mind is detecting and decoding, and it is now being objectified in the dowsing rod. The movements are imperceptible to the person seeing it, but the subcutaneous connective tissue in its micro movements moves, pushes tissue and skin. You couldn't see it happen, but the metal amplifies it. Do you understand? It serves as an amplification process that amplifies these micro movements in the subcutaneous connective tissue that then pulls the dowsing rod together. It's not a magic thing. It's not some invisible energy doing it, unless the electromagnetics are playing a bigger role than we currently understand that they might. There's probably parts of both. It's the same thing with a pendulum. When you see people taking a pendulum and spinning around and doing stuff like that, it's just complete bullshit. Somebody asked me to speak at a dowsing conference once, and I went. Oh my God. And I'm at this dowsing conference, and I'm asked to stand up and deliver remarks to a kind of a lecture hall at a college of dowsers. And I looked out in the audience, and half of the audience, while I was talking, were all standing there with pendulums, like holding them up, like holding them like this and spinning them around. It was like, so their idea is if it's spinning one way, I'm telling the truth. And if it's spinning a different way or however it's doing that, I'm not telling the truth. And I was just like, I got about 15 minutes into this and I just stopped and said, put that shit away. You are distracting. So, I'm not going to tell you what I think about what you're doing, but just put it away.
Right.
Listen to the lecture, and then you can go douse whatever you want to douse afterwards. And if you think it's works for you or it doesn't work for you, that's the improper use of it. It's a complete lack of understanding of what it does. It's a weight on the end of a string. It serves as an amplification. If you stabilize your hands and hold that and it's perfectly still, and then you start thinking to yourself with your hands stabilized, even up against your forehead, like this is a tripod, and it's down there. And if you start thinking, spin to the right, spin to the right, spin to the right, that causes a micro movement. It causes fluids within the body, like third-spaced fluids. It causes every capillaries, again, the connective tissue. It causes it all to start to react to our thoughts. Our thoughts are manifest in our physiology, and our physiology can cause manifestations in our thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. So that micro movement, and I do this when I teach this to remote viewing students in advanced techniques, and they're all amazed that they don't have to, it's not this, and they'll have a target. It's a pendulum target, north, south, east, west, right, circle, reverse, another circle, make it stand still. And they can do that with perfectly still hands, holding just the string between their fingers. And they're not blowing it around. They understand the exercise. It is the micro movements of fluids, capillary fluids, blood flow of everything in the body that's manifest through the mind.
That's pretty incredible.
Doesn't it make much more sense to you than the idea that you're swinging a piece of metal around on the end of a string and that's telling you truth or lie? I mean, it's just preposterous to me that goes on. But hey, it's accepted within that community as the way to do it, which is why I never went back ever again. So I learned it actually at the Greater New England Academy of Hypnosis, because when I was got into the remote viewing unit, I told you that, they were lacking sorely in everything. There were no programs of instruction, no manuals.
When you first got there?
When I first got there.
Right.
And, I know now that the former colleague tells everybody that he wrote a manual, but when I was on a podcast recently with Lynn Buchanan, who was there as long as this other person was, Lynn Buchanan said it was not a manual, and it was never a manual. It was a handout given to VIPs when they came into the unit so they could get some idea of what it is we were doing there. He goes, no, Dave's correct. There was never a manual, ever. There was never a manual, no program of instruction, no training outline, nada. Just a little VIP handout, which I never saw.
Right.
And so it's just so important to understand that where you were going with that. And so we need it. And we're using this. These were tools we were using as enhancing tools. These are called external tools to a remote viewer applying and working in an advanced technique. There are things you can do with a pendulum. There are things you can do with map sensing and the different techniques of map sensing and all those. You have a visual, you have a tactile form of sensing, and you have a tool form of sensing. And so all of those can be applied. And when you start plugging those into a remote viewing session, it's called a compound session. It's a compound target session, because now you're putting not just the remote viewing protocols to task, but you're also interjecting these other external tools and methods to track something over time or to pinpoint something in space, like 3D, below the ground, on the surface, or above the ground. There are all kinds of things you can do with it, so it really adds to it.
So getting back to the space wars.
Yeah.
You said that there was a physicist who wrote some stuff about this or started talking about this, putting it in place in 1945. And are we talking about like putting nuclear weapons in space? Is that?
No, it was certainly discussed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when the space wars began, once the Air Force was established, and again, they became the principal budget holders for all of this, in somewhere in 48 or 49, they stood before Congress and presented their budget for the space war program. And in that budget, they said that they wanted money to research space platforms. They wanted money to research space weapons. They wanted research money to work on space vehicles. All of those things were put into that budget. That budget was kind of rolled up as something that, as NASA, when NASA came into existence, they got their initial money, but as NASA was rolled into the program, in my opinion, as a diversion. I mean, both programs had their agendas, and there was certainly sharing of knowledge and technology, but they were independently operated, and one had the objective of preparing for war. The other had the objective of smokescreen that this is an effort for all humanity, right? We're all going to go to the moon. And we hope our brother cosmonauts can get there as well. We just want to get there before you.
When you say the NASA part was a smokescreen, do you think that was deliberate?
Oh, absolutely.
Or do you think that they actually believed that? And they didn't know what the left hand was doing.
I believe they didn't know. I believe that they knew that if they could get the American public to focus on the space race and not the space war, far less questions would be asked. And again, as I said to you, as that space war began, whenever we take a break here, I'll pull up an actual animation that will show you that from 1945, how the number of reported sightings of UFOs and encounters and blah, blah.
Really?
How that increased exponentially starting in 1945. As the space war thickened, because we've been, in 1968 out at Edwards Air Force Base, we were testing lifting body aircraft. Lifting body aircraft mean aircraft with no wings. Mm-hmm. In 1968.
Are you talking about like the things that we got from the Horton brothers? The Horton brothers developed that thing that looked like a flying saucer with no wings on the top left.
That's too new. You're looking at some of those are probably some of those aircraft, but these were.
Look at that! It's beautiful. It's kind of like that Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh, that is a lifting body, but that's not. See, the fact you've got an artist concept of that, that's a great project. So
that's incredible looking, dude. I've never seen anything like this before.
Wait here, and I'll show you.
Ooh.
Wow, look at that. It looks like a space shuttle, like a futuristic space shuttle.
It's called Dream Chaser, and they've still got it, but it's gone to gray now, which means it's not a black project
that
anymore.
means it's declassified or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but look at it. It has a re-entry. It has a re-entry speed of 15,000 miles per hour, Mach 20.
Wow.
Now, if you are a pilot who is trained to recognize enemy aircraft, and you are not trained to recognize secret aircraft, whether gray or in a black project, and you see that coming down out of the sky at Mach 20, when you're flying Mach 3.5 and you can't see wings and you cannot see a power plant in that, you don't get a thermal image, what are you to think? So,
Well,
here's an example of this. You remember that? You see this picture right here?
yeah.
Look at the profile of that picture.
Okay.
Okay.
It looks like, what does that look like? It just looks like a,
It looks like that
yeah, it does look
from
like
the ass end. That's what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That picture was taken by a backseater flying in that jet.
Okay.
He took it with an iPhone.
An F-15.
Took it with an iPhone. And then what does the UFO community do? The label, that picture is everywhere. You can see the back of the pilot's seat. You can see the curvature of the canopy. And there's that picture of that thing out there. And people in the UFO UAP community have taken that picture and labeled it a leaked photo. It was not leaked. It drives me fucking nuts that everybody has to say that. It's not leaked. It was on the guy's iPhone. He was sending it around to people going, check this out. You know, does anybody recognize this or know what this is? And the next thing, I don't know because I haven't been able to track it back to the source, but the other thing that is added into the commentary from UFO in the UFO UAP community says it appeared standing still in the air, that it was standing still. Well, let me explain that to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Dream Chaser.
There is an actual phenomenon that takes place that is part of the FAA manuals. It's because they alert pilots and train pilots this. It's called spatial disorientation in flight, autokinetic illusion. And the reason that autokinetic illusion occurs is because there is no static reference point. You have to have a static reference point within your visual field to be able to determine how fast something is moving or what your relative speed is in relation to that object in front of you. Pilots can have this spatial disorientation in flight. Most of the time, it's very commonly experienced when you're trying to land at night in a darkened area, like let's say the desert, and you have a military airfield and what's lit up are the landing lights. And they might be, let's say they're infrared because you're coming in on goggles, on night vision goggles. The spatial disorientation that happens, this kinetic illusion, autokinetic illusion, is your mind, because it doesn't have any static reference points, it has no terrain features, no buildings. It just sees the lights in front of it and the craft is coming. The illusion part of it is pilots think that the runway is pushing out in front of them. Their mind is saying the runway is running ahead of me.
Right.
Okay. Now that only stops when the pilot pays attention to all of his instruments, his airspeed indicator, attitude, where he is, glide slope indicator, everything. When he starts doing that and he stops trying to look out there, he can get himself out of that autokinetic illusion and get to the place where he can land the aircraft. It's a common thing. It's taught by the U.S. Air Force to watch out for it. The FAA makes sure that private pilots, commercial pilots, they all understand it. So in this particular scenario, this aircraft is flying at, let's say, Mach 4. Out in front of it, and it's flying up at, God, I don't know what their altitude was when the picture was taken, but I can tell you they had to be somewhere between 20 and 30,000 feet, which means, and it was a perfectly clear day. There were no clouds. So they have no static reference. The only way that pilot actually knows what his relative speed is looking at his indicated airspeed.
Right.
That's how he knows how fast he's going. Otherwise, he doesn't. It's not like you can look out the window and watch telephone poles go by or something else, right? So all of a sudden now, something at 15,000 miles per hour is doing a re-entry, heading for Edwards Air Force Base. And they don't like to bring these down in the daylight, but they do bring them down in the daylight, usually if there's an issue. And when they bring them down, they haul ass to get them on the ground so that people don't see them very much.
Right.
But this pilot, his backseater, snaps a picture of it. And the comment made that it looked like it was standing in air. That is that autokinetic illusion. It looked like it was standing in air because it's going 15,000 miles per hour and you're going Mach 4. So what you're seeing is it's actually getting smaller, but it is imperceptible to you that it's getting away from you because you have no static reference.
Right.
It is an absolute well-known phenomenon, but nobody explains something like that. So you look at the profile on that plane, and I'm not saying it's the Dream Chaser because the Dream Chaser is a great project now, okay? But I told you that for every black project, there's 10 variants. And of those 10 variants, anytime something doesn't measure up to where they want it to be, or if they feel that it's accomplished what they wanted to accomplish with it, they've learned all they can learn, it gets passed into the gray project.
Right.
And when it goes into gray project, they often get picked up for commercial uses and get sold, but they're not going to be adopted by the military for that.
I think a great example of the spatial orientation that a lot of people might be familiar with is I don't know if you've seen it before, but there was a video that was released by the Pentagon called the Go Fast video or the gimbal video, where there's a video of this like little orb that's flying against the ocean as a backdrop. And everyone's like, oh, look at this thing. This thing is going like 20,000 miles per hour, ungodly speeds. There's no propulsion. You can see no exhaust coming out of the back. But what they don't realize is that thing is flying in one direction, and the gimbal camera on the other plane is flying in the opposite direction, filming down with the ocean as a backdrop. So there's motion parallax, making that thing, this thing right here, making it look like it's going 4 times faster or something than it really is.
Yeah.
And they had trouble locking on it. And you know, that could be a fucking bird. Who knows? But when you're flying in the opposite direction in a jet or a plane, with the ocean as a backdrop, depending on how far away that thing is from the water, it's going to look like it's going at an ungodly speed.
There's a YouTube video that went viral of some guy with his phone camera in the passenger seat driving this direction away from the commercial airport. And he's got that camera up in the air, and you'll see a telephone pole go by. And then all you see are the wires, which give you no static reference point. And on final approach, there's a huge airliner coming in. And as he's holding the camera up and the telephone pole goes by, the plane appears to be static in the air. And then a telephone pole go by, and you'll get a quick glimpse of reference that it's actually going that way.
Right.
And then the wires come back, no static reference again. So it is totally confusing to the mind, the autokinetic illusion. And you're just like, what the hell? And so people were looking at it going like, it looks like it's standing still. And then the telephone pole goes by.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's what that is. And
what is this one? Possible sightings of a Lockheed Martin 791 hybrid AS designed and built with DARPA.
Yeah. We are building dirigibles now that exceed anyone's imagination or expectation. These are sometimes they used to be like rigid frame with external bodies on them, right? Canvas over that, like the Hindenburg. But now they're doing that, but there are other models that are rigid body. So they're building out
balloons.
Yeah, well, if you want to call them that, right. And they are rigid body, and they have stiffening capabilities built into the outer skin of the aircraft. And they have new synthetic materials, composites that are being built that create the skin on these things where they are not collapsible. As part of the space war effort, they are building balloons. I mean, they are building these things that are far greater than these. I mean, here's some more of these you can see. That too, if it were looked at in the same way, would have looked like that. If you were looking at it in the same, see, there's the actual backseater photo. See how far out that thing is? It's right there. It's right there. That's it.
That's why. Oh, shit.
Golly.
That's how far out there it is. And everybody, that's the picture. I blew it up for the purposes of showing you what it looks like. But look at the contour of the thing, right?
Yep, it looks almost just like it.
Yeah, it could, yes. And it looks just like the Dream Chaser. And it also looks like about 5 other of these aircraft that are in development or have been cast off to gray. You know, we shot down this was one.
Oh, God. Is this the Pheonix lights?
Yeah. Okay, so here's what happens, you know, in 13 March 1997. This large, in 1997, this large V-shaped craft with 5 spherical lights, a light in the nose and 2 down each side of it on the undercarriage. It's observed between 19:30 hours and 22:30 hours. It's described by witnesses as stationary or slow moving, and it is traveling across a 300-mile of space from where it was first sighted, 300 miles from Nevada across the state line to Phoenix and then on to Tucson, Arizona. And thousands of people observed this craft, thousands of them. Hundreds of reports made to law enforcement agencies and media outlets. Okay? The observers, they are describing this craft as a huge 60-degree carpenter square with 5 spherical lights. Well, a carpenter square is 90 degrees. So that already tells you this is a modification for some sort of a purpose. This craft is so low that some of the observers ran up to high ground in its path and were hitting it with rocks and tennis balls as it went past.
People reported doing this?
Yes. They were hitting the bottom of the craft because they were shooting like tennis ball cannons up at it. What? Now, if you really thought that was an alien spacecraft, you've got a pair of cojones on you to go out with a tennis ball cannon and start shooting tennis balls at the aliens as they're flying past you. But that on the right is what the craft looked like. Okay, explanations given by the military, and this is important. Operation Snowbird at David Monthan Air Force Base. Training of Air National Guard pilots, A-10. They were the A-10 Warthogs, right? The Thunderbolt II aircraft. And this was confirmed by the Maryland Air National Guard. There was a pilot, a lieutenant colonel, speaking, as part of this explanation given by the media. The static lights were due to the aircraft not having to use anti-collision lights, according to a spokesman for the FAA. Now, the FAA says to the press, the public, that there were no anti-collision lights on this aircraft because the military does not have to turn anti-collision lights on all the time. But wrong answer. They cannot fly in civilian airspace without anti-collision lights on. They can fly on military reservations without anti-collision lights. Anti-collision lights are the blinking red, right? And white or green lights you see.
Yep.
That tells you whether the aircraft, when you look at it, it tells you whether the aircraft is coming or going away from you. It allows you to see it where it is in spatial orientation when you're flying in and around it. So,
Steve, pull up a photo of the Phoenix lights. If you just type in Phoenix lights, it'll show you like the pictures and videos people took from the ground.
All right.
Yeah, look how big that shit is.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get to that. God. So they also they said it was they were illumination flares that had been dropped from the AC. From the A-10 Warthogs.
What was the media's official explanation for this?
They didn't have one. They passed on these points that I just showed you.
Didn't the governor came and did some sort of public talk wearing like an alien outfit?
He absolutely did, and they basically. The community just burned him down for it because he made light of it.
Mocking
you had thousands of people in the area that had witnessed it, and they did not appreciate him. He first started off being very supportive, but somebody told him, to shut your mouth and, go sit down and make a joke. And so he did. He did what they told him to do, and it really cost him. People were very, very angry about him in doing this.
Did he ever say who told him to change his mind on it?
No.
No.
Not that I'm aware of. He did apologize.
I remember that many years later.
Many years later.
Yeah.
So here's what this thing is. It is an aerospace orbital airship. They began building and testing these in 1964 as part of the space war, not the space race. They are building these balloons to be capable of achieving hypersonic speeds over Mach 3. I know, because you're head up to heights of 400,000 feet. Why are they going to do that? These are surface to orbit transport vehicles. They are building they're building balloons that will serve as, they aren't even really balloons. They have fabric that's self-sealing. They don't leak gas, so they never get to the point where, where the gas diminishes and they fall out of the sky. Mm-hmm. You put up a weather balloon, which is filled with helium, mm-hmm. and it will go up, and the helium eventually finds its way through the pores of the rubber because lack of pressure,
right? The
helium expands the balloon, and the balloon either completely bursts and falls back to Earth, or it just starts to leak. Just like when you have a helium balloon that you bought at the fair and you bring it home, it will not stay afloat forever.
Right.
It gradually weeps that gas, lighter than air, through the material of the balloon. Mm-hmm. So they had to build something that didn't do that. And there are about 3 different aerospace contractors that are doing this. JP Aerospace is one. There's another one in Las Vegas. There's another one somewhere else. And you have McDonnell Douglas. You have all at Northrop Grumman. You have all the big contractors working on this stuff. They are building these things out of materials that are exotic, that don't leak, that if they get punctured in some way, like from a meteor, they self-seal. Mm. Right? You would think with the number of meteors that drop on the Earth, which is essentially even the little micrometeors. Micrometeors, it's the equivalent of a giant 10-wheel dump truck filled with like 9 tons of them. Right. That's how much hits the Earth every day, right?
How do you know this? How did you find this stuff?
There are patents in the clear that you can see these. And I know that the president of JP Aerospace, in response to the Pheonix lights, would not own up to it being his craft or somebody else's craft. But he said, I recognize the technology. And that was the clue to go look further for this.
Who did he say that to?
He said it to an interview given to the media or to a documentarian. They asked him about it, and he said, yeah, I remember, and I remember it very well. He goes, I recognize the technology.
Do you remember the documentary you saw this on?
No. I'll send you a note on it.
Okay.
Okay. That's what this is. This is what they're calling, they're calling this the ground to space vehicle. It can go up 400,000 feet.
And where did you get these illustrations?
These illustrations are from gray projects, clearly, right? These are not illustrations of active projects. These are illustrations where they start off with what we're going to do or what we're going to work toward. Okay? And this goes all into the idea of the dimension of space being a war zone. Mm-hmm. They want to put these very quickly built things that can be easily crafted, and they hover in low Earth orbit or further out. They can be autonomous. They can store supplies in them. They can be a functioning space base in them. They're massive. They're absolutely massive. Look, it's 175 feet long, and that's just this one. It was called the Trans-Atmospheric Ascender. And there's a A26, 36, an Ascender 90, and a one called the Ascender 175.
And you found this in a patent?
Well, I think the patent is in the slide deck here.
Okay.
Yes, that was the start.
Okay.
There were two clues. One was JP Aerospace's president saying, and these are JP Aerospace's craft, the Ascender series.
Oh, wow.
And the idea is to pick up materials, pick up parts, weapons, ammunition, supplies, people, whatever they need.
So
and
people
to
can
take
be
them up.
inside this?
Absolutely. I'll show you. This is the space station. Solar powered, constructed, and you can see the one on the left and right. These are, you can see the Ascender comes up, drops off cargo, picks up passengers, picks up something, waste or whatever it needs, and it goes back down again. And they plan to put these everywhere because if you are going to control the dimensional space with static stations, nobody's going to build another mirror up there. That's not going to happen. It's too expensive, takes too long. They can turn these things out by the dozens, right? And put them up there. And they are massive. That center core in the middle of the one on the top right, the red, where you see the red,
Right.
that's as big as a basketball stadium.
Jesus. And you have the patents for this in the slides.
Yeah, there. Look at down at the bottom right photo. You see the man standing next to it?
Yeah, that's enormous.
Give you a little bit of scale, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's just this is one that is clearly not even classified yet. It's a gray project. That's how somebody gets a picture and tosses it out there. Mm-hmm. But what flew over Pheonix that night was our creation. And they believe that it probably got off of its tether. You know, they fly them. Mm-hmm. They don't fly by wire. They fly them through radio control to test them. And it had nobody on board, but it got off the reservation, quite literally, came across the Nevada state line, coming from Area 51, drifted all the way to Phoenix and then Tucson. And everybody was like, holy shit, we got to cover this because we don't want people to know that this is what we're doing. But to everybody that wanted to see it as a UFO, which I guess technically it is, but it's not otherworldly. I think if you were to statistically look at and compare the number of sightings with what is probably actually us,
Holy shit.
it's probably about, I was on a show where two guys were intel guys saying that they thought it was about 94% of what's observed is actually they are products out of the space war. And I said, I think that's a very conservative underestimate of that. I think it's probably closer to 1998.
On the drive. Click on
98%.
that one, yeah.
Yeah.
Click on that, yeah. We talk giant V-shaped airships, space in the Phoenix Lights with JPL.
Yeah.
Click on that. This is an interview with the founder of JPL.
There you go.
Oh.
There we go. Look, there's the same images you had.
Yeah. I mean, even the CG rendering.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I tend to think the same thing. You know, I really, what really confirmed this whole thing for me that this was our stuff is when our media started talking about it and saying that we don't know what it is.
Yeah, and when politicians started, sitting down into hearings and saying, "Trust me, I'm on your side. I'll make sure we get this stuff." Yeah, you're not going to get anything. And people just whip themselves up into a frenzy about that. They actually think that that these things are going to be somehow exposed because they're demanding them. They have no idea what they're asking. It's never going to happen. Never going to happen.
Have you ever seen the documentary called Mirage Men?
No.
It's an incredible documentary. I think one of the best UFO documentaries I've ever seen, and I just watched it recently. But it came out a number of years ago, and it was. I think I told you about it over the phone. It was about this guy. He was a ufologist named Paul Bennewitz, and he lived in Arizona or Nevada. And there were these unidentified flying objects flying over the mountain across the street from his house, and he would be constantly filming them and sharing them with the UFO community. The guys on the base that was right next to his house, they got wind of this footage that he was taking, and they sent a counterintelligence officer to go pay him a visit at his house to see what he knew, to see if he had any like legitimate information on what they were testing. And he saw the videos, and he talked to Paul Bennewitz, and Paul Bennewitz thought these were aliens. They were UFOs. And this guy named Richard Doty, who was the counterintelligence guy for the Air Force, he says, you know what? I think you're right. I think these must be UFOs. We need to get to the bottom of this. And started just pushing him in that direction. And basically, the idea was to use Paul as a conduit of disinformation into the whole UFO community to sort of poison the well, if you will. And they knew that there were Soviet spies embedded in the UFO community that were trying to get information on some of these UFOs, and they wanted to basically like sow disinformation within them and confuse, if there were spies embedded in the UFO community, confuse them, confuse everybody, and just sow disinformation throughout that whole thing. And they fucking drove this guy crazy. This guy ended up in a mental hospital and ended up dying there. So, you know, the lengths that the military is willing to go to confuse the public and what they've been, you know, evidence that they've been doing this since the 60s, putting in so much time and effort and resources into confusing people, like, think about that, and now think about what they could possibly be doing now.
Precisely. Yeah, they're not doing it to be nefarious characters. They're doing it because the public has, first of all, no need to know and absolutely no right to know. There is we are in a very dangerous condition on this planet. And if you think that that's not so, then you're ignorant or you're just Pollyannish and have no idea what's actually possible out there. If you think that Putin has our best interests in mind, you're a fool. And if you think the Chinese don't want to get up there, and if they ever thought that they could dominate us in some way, if you think that what they really care about is living in peace and harmony within their own, then you don't understand the geopolitical situation and what happens. War is always happening. It's an extension of politics, right? As Clausewitz said. So we have to let the people that we pay, to pick up the weapons and do the dirty work of the republic. We have to let them defend us. We have to let them research for us. We have to let them develop. And we don't have rights to demand to be given full briefings on this stuff because it doesn't stop with us. That means that we are now tipping our hand in this spy versus spy, army versus army, Air Force against Air Force, country against country. And it's a very real war and a very real fight. They want what we have in terms of technology. In some cases, we might want to know what they have. But none of them tell their public what they have. And we will never start doing that. It's not going to happen, ever. So if you think that somebody is going to walk out of the shadows from some special access program and talk to you about anything about this space war and these craft, or even if they did have a crashed alien spacecraft, they would never expose that. Those special access programs exist as they exist. They are typically headed by civilians because the military is not a good candidate for it. Because why? The military is transient. You come in as a colonel, you're going to command maybe for 2 years or 3 years, and they're going to pull you out, change command, new guy comes in. You're going to let you walk out of that organization, read onto and have seen everything that's there? No, that's not how they do it. It's also why they would never brief the president. I don't care. It's why any president that tells you that he's going to go pull the lid off of this, which has pretty much been every president, right? Oh, yeah, I'll get to the bottom of that. Yeah, sure you will, Mr. President. They see that guy as same thing, transient. You may be here for 4 years, so go fuck you. We're not telling you anything.
Right.
And even if he throws his, starts pounding on the table, they'll just go right back, and they will come right back and give him the exact same briefing that they gave him, 4 days ago. They will change nothing for him. And he has no legal precedent available to him to force them to do that because it's in the interest of national security. And that does not entitle him to know everything. That's how they look at it. And those little curmudgeons that run those programs, those special access programs, they guard them, like their mother's underwear. They are not giving that stuff up to anybody. So, and you can't make them. And it's like, let's take a look at another craft here.
Yeah. What is this?
This is a
like
Navy
from
craft.
Star Wars.
And the one on the right is an actual photo of the craft. This craft now.
Wait, the one on the right is an actual photo?
The one on the right is an actual photo. This craft, its wings fold, and it is launched from a missile tube in a nuclear submarine. It is fired out of the missile tube with an air charge. Its missiles prepare to ignite, and it gets up out of the water. Its wings spring open, its engine fires, and it flies. It is unmanned. It flies at supersonic speed, not hypersonic. It is a reconnaissance aircraft, but if they're admitting it's a reconnaissance aircraft, trust me, they are weaponizing it as well. They're never going to put something up just, as a sensory. It'll be an offensive jammer or it'll do something else. And if it can fly like that, they'll bring it up and they will let it kill something one of these days.
The Cormorant.
The idea is that this thing will go do its job. It comes back. It dives just like a cormorant, the bird, right? It folds its wings in. It hits the water. And they're saying that right now it has to be intercept a cable and it's towed back into the missile compartment. I have it on for good authority that it's way past that point now. It can come back. It can fold its wings. It can hit the water. It finds the sub based on a homing beacon, and it goes to the submarine, folds itself up, and goes back into the missile tube.
They even got the fucking Lockheed logo right on the side.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, that would be the big test piece of it, right?
General dynamics, too.
Yeah, oh yeah. That's what I said. Anytime you're looking at a black project, there will be every major aircraft development contracting. They all have their classified branches. They build, luxury liners for commercial travel, and they also have their classified branch that builds weapons, space vehicles, and classified aircraft like this. It's an ongoing, constant process of improving, redefining the mission, developing the aircraft, building the aircraft, testing the aircraft, dropping the ones off that they're no longer interested in, and continuing with the black projects for the ones that they do want.
What is this right here? What is this diagram you have right here? DOD, NASA, space race.
This is, I did this to show people where and when the space race began, where NASA and the Soviet Union got into the game, and where China got into the game. So I go from December 1945, when Chief of Staff of the Army General Henry Arnold and the physicist Dr. Theodor von Kamen, yeah, he was German, they formed this U.S. Air Force Scientific Advisory Board. It was the U.S. Air Corps at that time, right? And they put into play a 50-year strategic vision for space war. And they did it December 1945. They established when it became the Air Force and actual Air Force in 54. That's when they put the Space Division, the Western Development Division. 58, the U.S. Air Force Aeronautics Development Program was submitted to the Defense Department. That's where they ask for the money to develop space weapons, space vehicles, space stations, and a bunch of other stuff. You can see right in there how this is all crafted and where it started and what was happening in this particular area, right?
Wow.
So in 59, 68, this research branch gets $9 billion in funds that was supposed to go, it was being shown as it was going to NASA to support the space race, but the 7 billion of the 9 billion went to the space war effort. 7 billion of the 9 billion went there.
Wow.
So, yeah. And in 61, when President John F. Kennedy asks for that 9 billion, the title of his remarks to Congress was Urgent National Needs. Now, you think he's standing up and talking to him about NASA and titling it Urgent National Needs? He was talking in code to them about the space war effort that was ongoing. And, oh, yeah, by the way, NASA, we started that in 58. President Eisenhower started it, but he really kicked it in the ass, in 61. Kennedy did, right? But then you look down on the USSR line, and they started in 57. And when they started in 57, that was when they put Sputnik up in orbit in 57 for October. And everybody in America was stunned that this had happened. But our Air Force knew it was happening. They had intelligence that let them know that was going to happen. And as soon as that went up, part of the budget was dedicated to sat killers. So the development of sat killer weapons, satellites that kill satellites, ground-based or aircraft launch sat killer missiles that could be flown up to the edge of the atmosphere and launched by a Navy or an Air Force warplane. And that sat killer would then exit the atmosphere, seek out its target, and bring it down.
Are you familiar with the recent story? I think it was a couple of years ago, less than 10 years ago, where Kim Jong-un launched a satellite into space, and we had reconnaissance, or we had some sort of intelligence on it. And our military thought that he had nukes on board of the satellite. And he was saying, no, there's no weapons on the satellite. This purpose of this satellite is to relay patriotic music to our citizens.
Sure, yeah.
And he denied that. But I think that the problem with this satellite is it orbits the Earth like every 90 minutes or something like that, and it flies directly over the U.S. like multiple times a day. And they think that some of these satellites that are hovering around have nukes on board.
I'm sure they do. I mean, especially, I don't know how if Korea has the technology to miniaturize, and do that, but they're certainly not without the intellect to do it. They may lack the budget to do it, but China may be funding them. Mm-hmm. I don't think the Russians are, but I think China would be funding them. Mm-hmm. And if you get enough of the budget, they're not stupid. They know how to do shit. They just need money to do it with. And I'm sure that those would be there. Now, I know that if we thought it was a threat, we would have already taken it down. We took down a Soviet satellite in 1968.
Did it have weapons on it?
No, it just was a Soviet satellite that was in the wrong place where we didn't want it to be. Mm-hmm. And we had a U.S. Navy pilot that flew the first sat killer missile up from under the bottom of his warplane and took it to the place where they told him to release it right at the edge of space, and he did. And they killed that satellite. And then they turned around and said, well, it wasn't a Soviet satellite. It was actually just an old defunct satellite that belonged to us. It was not. It was a Soviet satellite that was just like this satellite you just mentioned. It was going in the wrong place, and diplomatically we could not get them to move it. And this is why the space war has always been so critical, because whoever gets the most there, the most technology there, and the most capability to defend their position from space, right, and react to enemy threats, whatever those might be, that's the one that's going to have the safest position. It's considered. We don't want them to put weapons in a geosynchronous orbit over our planet, and we will over our country, and we won't let them do that.
Well, that's the problem with deterrence, right? If we're doing it and we're spending all this money creating all these crazy vehicles that look like spaceships and have nukes in space, they have to do the same thing, right? That's the whole idea behind deterrence. And then if we keep doing it, they're going to keep doing it. And before you know it, the whole globe is going to have nukes pointing at every single city at all times. Unfortunately,
That is accurate. But also, there is no way to diffuse that.
have you seen some of the I saw recently in a book that Annie Jacobson is getting ready to release. There's like a map that shows submarine traffic from Chinese nuclear subs and Russian nuclear subs, and quite literally every day the traffic lanes for these subs are going right up the West Coast, passing like Los Angeles, and then all the way up the East Coast, like right off the coast of the Bahamas and Florida.
Yeah.
Like looping right off the coast of America on both coasts. It's fucking insane.
And we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And we will continue to do it because that's a first strike capability. I mean,
that's another crazy thing too, is the whole I forget what the word is. I think it's a strike on notice or something like that. Like as soon as it's one of the policies that we have here, that as soon as we get signals intelligence confirmed that there is a warhead or a nuclear missile heading towards America, we have to empty our silos before that thing hits. So because we have all of our nuclear missile silos in the northwest United States, those we can't move those. They know exactly where those are, and we know exactly where the ones in Russia and China are as well. So as soon as we get notice that there's a nuke coming towards us, we have to assume that they're going to destroy those. So it's like a use it or lose it thing. So we have to empty ours. So it's like as soon as one person launches, we have to launch.
Yeah,
and
do you know why?
It's like a use it or lose it.
Yeah,
we don't want to lose our
nukes. The first strike, people always, think it's that the first strike is Washington, D.C. and major cities. And it is not.
Right.
That's not the nuclear exchange. That's not. Now, I know that people listening to this are going to probably go, so fucking what, right? It's still nuclear war. But what we target in the first strike is their weapons.
Yes.
And they target our weapons.
Right.
And the reason that is done is because that's supposed to drive the two warring interests to the diplomatic table to seek a solution, right? It's supposed to be that. If we destroy your weapons, you destroy ours. Now we're on the phone leader to leader talking about why that happened and what happened and what it's supposed to be sorted out. The next target package escalates. It escalates. But the idea that it hits major populated areas and cuts off the head of the entire country by taking out Washington, those are last resort targets. That's not what anybody's after. Right. That doesn't help me feel better about it,
no.
But you just have to understand it. And yes, there are, and mistakes can happen. In 1983, about 2 months before we actually invaded Grenada, there was a young Soviet missile commander in the Soviet Air Force, a lieutenant colonel who was taking his shift. And When he just took command of the shift. In other words, his missile command staff all come in, take the shift over, and the others out brief and go. And they are there. And they are not there for an hour. And all of a sudden, the klaxon sounds. And when the klaxon sounds, it's saying there is inbound missiles. There was a nuclear missile fired from the United States, from the western portion of the United States, fired at the Soviet Union. This young lieutenant colonel has them call back the algorithmists, they're called. So the algorithmists are supposed to relook at the calculations of the computer to confirm or deny. They can say, no, we don't agree, right? It's not inbound. It's not headed for this place. The computer is wrong in some way. The algorithmists confirm it. They say, we confirm 100% a missile was fired and the missile is inbound. They had a Soviet satellite over in geosynchronous orbit, meaning tracking with us, looking down at America, and it could not verify the missile launch because there was a thermocline as the sun was setting and the darkness was coming, and it obscured the optics on the satellite, so it couldn't see it, couldn't confirm it. So you have the computer says missile launch, the algorithmists all confirm missile launch. The satellite can't see, the operators can't see, and this young lieutenant colonel is now being hounded by his entire staff for exactly what you said, because their protocol is, if 2 of the 3 indicators say, yes, we are supposed to launch.
Right.
This young man said no. He said, I'm not, no. He had generals calling him, why did you not launch? And 15 minutes after the first one, a klaxon sounds again. Another missile launch is reported by the computer. Again, the algorithmists confirm the computer, and again, the satellite cannot see because of the thermocline. It cannot tell or confirm. This young lieutenant colonel has eventually, this keeps repeating itself, 4 confirmed by computer and algorithmists, 4 U.S. nuclear missiles inbound for the Soviet Union in 1983. This guy says, he tells everybody, generals calling him, he says, it's my job to decide what to do. Everyone is against him, like, comrade, you know, you are screwing this up, you know, we're going to die, you know, our weapons are going to be taken out and you're not doing anything about it. Can you imagine the pressure he was under? Not to mention that his wife was dying of cancer at home, and he was distraught by that. So here he is, all of that. Everybody hates his guts, and he says, I will wait for the ground radar to confirm the missiles. So the ground radar is shooting at the horizon, and so if those missiles enter their pattern, they will detect it. And they watch the clock and watch the clock and watch the clock. And first missile, according to the computer and the algorithmists, has now entered Soviet airspace and should be monitored inbound to its target. And the radar operators call the Missile Command Center and say, no missile detected.
Wow.
For the second missile, no missile detected. For the third, no missile detected. For the fourth, no missile detected. The reward for him doing this was everybody great relief and tears, because nobody wants a thermonuclear war. The next day, the general in charge of this guy calls him in, demotes him to major, claims that he falsified his log for the night before, demotes him to major, relieves him of his position, and he basically just serves out the rest of the time in the Air Force as a pariah. And his story is never known until after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he is pretty much an alcoholic. His wife died. He lives alone, doesn't speak to his brother, doesn't speak to his mother. He just...
Is he still alive?
He died recently. He died, I think, in 2018. But once that was discovered about him, a book was written and a documentary done called The Man Who Saved the World.
Yeah.
And people don't know that story and don't care to know that story. And what great courage. What, I mean, can you imagine? He could have, if he acted in accordance with what he was trained to do and expected to do, they would have launched against us. So, what an unbelievable blessing and what an unbelievable act of courage on this man's part. And he's the sworn enemy of the United States. And yet he was that hesitant to begin a thermonuclear war. I can only hope, but I doubt that in our processes, if something like that were to happen, that we would have people who would act the same.
And we only have 26 minutes to make that call. The time it would take a missile, a ground missile, to fly through the atmosphere and hit the United States from Russia would be 26 minutes. And they have only like 6 minutes to launch it when they find out or they get that intelligence. It's insane the amount of time, the small amount of time.
And 1 Minuteman missile, 1 Minuteman missile warhead carries the explosive force of every bomb dropped in the European theater and by the Allies, and every bomb dropped in the Pacific theater by the Allies, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all combined into one warhead.
Right.
It's devastating to think about the thing. And we have 3,600 of them.
And the subs have the MIRVs, where they have 3 or 4 warheads and 1 missile.
Yeah.
And those things are all targeted.
It goes out, yeah.
It's terrifying. And to think that, imagine if North Korea were to launch a nuke towards the U.S. and we got wind of that and we had to do a launch on ready where we had to shoot, empty our nuclear arsenal back towards North Korea, where our nukes have to fly over Russia to hit North Korea. We fly them north. So we have to get, within 6 minutes, we have to get Putin on the phone and be like, yo, we're launching these nukes at North Korea, not you. But when's the last time we got Putin on the phone? Hello? Oh, I think my audio just kind of clacked out. When's the last time we were able to get Putin on the phone that fast?
I don't know. I'm assuming, that's what the nuclear football is all about.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's not, and it's the other thing that people don't understand about this process is like, people, they're either lunatics or they're just doing it for their own propaganda purposes. Like, remember all the people bitching and complaining about the fact that that President Trump became President Trump. And the big claim by many was that, you're putting the nuclear football, you're putting the fate of the free world, into this guy's hands kind of thing. No president has the single authority to launch a thermonuclear war. We would never put that. Do you want to have Biden to be capable of, waking up and yawning and then turning around and going, yeah, fire?
Right.
That doesn't happen that way. There's an entire chain of approval that has to happen, and it happens quickly. It has to happen very quickly. But that's why there's a guy running around with what they call the nuclear football, which is a communications device, for the president to be able to contact other world leaders simultaneously or one at a time, and to make those decisions, to tell them, look, this is not good, or we are detecting inbound missiles. Did you fire on us? Kind of thing. So I'm sure that the leader of China, and I'm sure that the leader of Russia, I'm sure that the leader of most nuclear nations, if not all of them, have that same communications capability. It kind of goes,
I would hope so,
with the responsibility.
Probably not North Korea.
You want to look at this UFO, this video?
Yeah, what is this video?
Okay, now this is an ESRI animation. It's a company that tracks this stuff. And I told you that, when you're looking at this timeline, I want you to see how from 1945 the number of UFO, UAP sightings increases. Because as we start the space race, check this out. So here we come, 38, nothing really. And here we hit into the 40s.
Oh, wow.
Quite telling, is it not?
Wow, man. Jeez, New York is lit up. Wow.
Amazing, right?
That is incredible.
That is a really powerful, and you can see there's not a lot. Now look, arguments for this are, you'll see people will go, well there were UFO sightings and in the 13th century and in the 16th century.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. What there were sightings of things that people didn't understand what they were seeing, and they may very well have been, otherworldly. I'm not saying that that's certainly not a possibility. I firmly believe that there are other worlds and there are other races and there are other developed planets and there are vehicles and other things out there, but it is not like it's not like we're imagining that it is. I think that there's probably about somewhere between 2 and 4% that are actual sightings of those kinds of things, of the reported sightings, and the rest of the sightings are space war technology.
Right. What is your opinion on this David Grusch fella?
The one everybody's calling a whistleblower?
Yes. And he's talking about, he just recently went to New York and did some talk at some penthouse for some billionaire, talking about how he saw a craft that looked like it was 40 feet from the outside, and as soon as you go inside the craft, it's as big as a football field. He's saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and there's off-planet beings.
The rise of the con, man. It's like people can say anything. First of all, he's not a whistleblower, okay? And I hate that when people start calling people that are doing what he's doing whistleblowing. What he is a purveyor of hearsay, because only a few intelligent interviewers, in listening to him rant on about, I know that we have captured alien craft, I know that we have alien bodies, and a few intelligent interviewers have said, have you seen these? Well, no. Then how do you know? Well, I have some colleagues who are trusted sources who do have personal knowledge of these things, and if they're telling me that, that's what who are these people? Well, I can't tell you that. Well, there you go. So now all you are is a hearsay peddler. You're standing up, expressing some degree of narcissistic, sociopathic tendency. Some might even say pathological. So you can get your face on a camera. You get this endearing public supporting you in what you're saying, but you have no proof, no evidence, and the fact that you claim somebody told you something, frankly, just doesn't pass the litmus test for us. And we have to be discerning about these things. Anybody can stand up today and say anything, and the number of people who will actually turn around and go, I think that's bullshit, is minimal. Because everybody else wants to chime in on it, especially if you're part of the UFO community. It's just like, David Greer standing up and saying... Stephen Greer, sorry. In one of his documentaries, he stands up and stares straight into the camera and says, well, yeah, because of my CE5 protocol, right? Which is a bunch of folks in the desert sitting around in lawn chairs, standing up and, staring up into space and communicating with their mind, right, is what he's saying, following this CE5 protocol, which is nothing more than a meditation, is what it is. And he starts plugging in words like remote viewing and other stuff, right, trying to dovetail on some of those technologies. And he claims that this was so powerful and so innovative and so amazing. He stood right there on a documentary and said, and oh yeah, after we were doing this and having all this great success, he said that the chief of staff for intelligence, for Army intelligence, scooped him up off of the street in Washington, D.C., and took him to a hotel where at the hotel there were 2 Air Force officers and 2 CIA agents, and that he was roughed up and interrogated, very brutally, or words to that effect, and that they told him, who do you think you are for developing this protocol? We didn't give you permission to communicate with the aliens, et cetera, et cetera. Now, do you believe one word of that? First of all, the chief of staff for Army intelligence is a 3-star general. A 3-star general went out and took his weightlifting steroid ass and stuffed him in the back of a military vehicle and carried him away. He didn't say MPs grabbed me. He said the chief of staff of the Army intelligence grabbed him. How does that happen? It doesn't. They don't go take people off the street, and certainly some 3-star general doesn't go do it.
Right.
And he doesn't have a staff to go muscle people around and do something like that. So I would, but nobody asked that question. Well, what was his name? Who were the guys that helped him, or did he do it by himself? What kind of car was it? You say he took you to a hotel. What hotel? Did it have a name? And if you're saying there were 2 Air Force officers in there, how do you know they were Air Force officers?
Right.
Well, if they had uniforms on, they have name tags on. And even if they're not wearing their jacket, they have name tags on. Who were they? And what ranks were they? And if CIA agents were there, how do you know they were CIA agents? Did they show you ID? Right? You see, but nobody asked those questions. And the whole UFO community accepts this as truth. And it is not. It is not. It's just ridiculousness. But here, it's like I said, we are in an age of the rise of the con. You can just stand up and say anything. You can be that preposterous and draw a crowd. There will be an element of the population, just like Itzhak Bentov showed you. There will be an element of the population that will believe that just because it was said by a medical doctor. An emergency medical doctor. I don't think his license is current, but hey.
Who, Greer?
Yeah, I don't think it is, but maybe it is. Who knows?
Yeah, I get a lot of culty vibes from a lot of these people in the UFO community, especially people that are monetizing it. People that they're making so much money from people getting paying for. I think he sells
the
tickets.
CE5 protocol.
Oh, does he really?
Absolutely. And it's, from what I understand, it's pretty pricey. I can't quote the exact price, so I say this, check me on it. But I think it's somewhere around $1,500 for this thing. And I have a copy of it right here. And you'll look at it, and it's just laughable.
What does that mean, CE5 protocol?
It means it's like from the movie The thing with Richard Dreyfuss and Devil's Tower. What the hell was the name of that movie? I can't remember it now. It was that movie with Richard Dreyfuss where he starts, mashing mashed potatoes around.
Close Encounters?
Close Encounters. So CE is Close Encounters of the fifth kind, which is mind communication with aliens. We're calling the spacecraft down. But there are people who actually believe that that's what they're doing. I don't know. Maybe they're out there in this, but they're always going to places where there are known sightings of probably Space Wars craft being re-entering for landing somewhere and coming in at 18,000 miles per hour or 23,000 miles per hour and doing what they're doing. But they believe that they're calling these craft down into to assembly to present themselves to them. And there are no controls, and they're not trained. They just get this protocol and then they do it. And I'm not trying to be critical of those people doing that. when a person stands up that is supposed to have an intellect that they trust. I mean, when he went into that community, I mean, they thought that God had descended down, to be with them, because they had never had a spokesperson that came from, that level of society. They were always, former Air Force this or Air Force that, or somebody else that was willing to step into that position and try to keep that community held together with promises. And, he stepped in making the promise that he was going to, rip this up and open it up, and we were going to get some answers. And he, like everybody else, when he soon finds out that that's not going to happen, then you have to start exaggerating things. Mm-hmm. You have to start, throwing up smoke screens. I'll give you another example. He goes to some guy that was in the Air Force. He could have been an officer. He may have been a senior non-commissioned officer. I can't remember. But he actually gets an audience with an Air Force officer in the Pentagon, probably a spokesperson for some staff division there. The implication is that these are the guys that oversee the UFO UAPs, but there's no indication of that whatsoever. It's just if this guy calls up and calls in a favor, somebody, maybe this Air Force major or maybe an Air Force captain, just gets detailed to do that. So he sits down with them and listens to them talk about what their demands are, what they want, and why it should be happening, and they don't understand, and they've been trying. And this Air Force officer prepares what's called a memorandum for record. A memorandum for record is done after every conversation like that. There are probably 5 million memorandums for record, MFRs for short, produced in the Pentagon from every office, from phone calls to staff briefings to interoffice agency communications. MFRs are like corpuscles, Mm-hmm. It's a lifeblood in the military. It carries information. And so they're rarely classified. And if they are classified, they actually go by another route, because they might say classified, and then every sentence that could be classified or every paragraph that has classified information would have to have a classification mm-hmm. to the left of the paragraph, and then the number, and then the paragraph. But once again, I'm sure what happened is the individual that had the contact probably picked up the phone, called back in there and said, hey, I know you've done an MFR. Or the guy said, look, I'll do an MFR. I'll draft this up and I'll pass it on, which is exactly what he would say. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I got everything here, I think, in my notes. I'll do an MFR and I'll pass it to the next officer in the chain.
Right.
And I'm sure that individual asked for a copy of that MFR, which would not be an unusual thing to ask for. And if that MFR was classified, he would never get a copy of it. Mm-hmm. But the MFR was not classified. It wasn't classified. And there would be absolutely no hesitation whatsoever for that officer who generated the MFR to send a copy to the two people that were there, spilling their guts to him about what they wanted and needed. And it would say on this date, at this time, mm-hmm. these two people appeared in my office room, blah, 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 the E-ring of the Pentagon, and we talked for 1 hour on these subjects. They brought this to my attention, this, and they made these demands or they made these requests, and my response to them was this. That's a memorandum for record. It's a record of the conversation.
Right.
Goes over his signature block, and he would have had no problem emailing a copy of that. But how it's now couched to the UFO community is by Greer and the other guy, it's a leaked memorandum. A leaked memorandum, of our conversation. Right? And it's not a leaked memorandum. It was simply an email to you because It's not classified. Nothing in there that they're concerned about. And that memorandum from that point, if it did go to the next officer in the chain and the desk, the action taken on it was probably to roll it up into quite a small ball and throw it in the trash can right there. I mean, they have important shit to work on and do and take care of. They're not going to run something like that up the tape and back down again the tape. And they're not going to put that in front of general officers for general officers to, have to sign that they've read this thing. It's not going to happen. So it's just this idea that you can't be honest about what you're really doing and what's really happening. Why can't you? Because, as you said, when it's being monetized and when you're trying to hold the position, you have to keep saying something that makes the people in the community believe that what you're saying is real and that you really are kicking it up the ladder and going to get important results. And it's just all smoke.
People are so easily convinced of the most outrageous things just to get some sort of sense of community. People who are antisocial or outcasts from any realm of society to have that sense of community, with people like Greer and other people in the whole UFO community. I get like a lot of Heaven's Gate vibes, the Heaven's Gate cult.
Absolutely, I know.
Where it convinced all these people to commit suicide, that they were going to ascend to another planet to hang out with the aliens.
That might be a little extreme in the comparison, but I get where you're coming from.
It's the same thing, man. It's so culty. It's so culty.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody who has some sort of knowledge that is privileged and they're very charismatic, and you get a bunch of people who together want to believe it, and they're not listening to any sort of like outside logic against it. It's just this cycle of reinforcing, bias reinforcement on everything that these people are telling them, and they're paying money. It's like you're in this positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
And I just get that vibe from a lot of things that are happening in this whole UFO community.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's disappointing. I don't necessarily like to tell that story, but I was so insulted by the fact that a man of letters would stand up and say that to people, and I know it is absolutely untrue. It would never happen, but nobody questioned him on that, and I don't like taking on, that kind of persona to talk about that. But part of what I'm trying to say or make a message to people is we have to start listening, and we have to start being discerning. We have to, put things through a litmus test. We have to try to figure out what somebody's saying is total bullshit for money, right? Or for fame. Or if it actually has some degree of merit, but we can't keep running around, and much of that community, as you and I have talked about, they are constantly divining their lives down to be looking for something to be offended by, right?
Or how much of these people are just useful idiots, and they have handlers that are pushing them in one direction and they don't know. They're completely unaware. Maybe they aren't making money off it. Maybe they're just like getting attention, and there's somebody like nudging him one direction. Like, hey man, I think you're onto something. I think you should really. And he knows like this guy's connected, and he's telling me, well, I'm kind of on the right path, so I'm going to keep going down this.
Yeah.
This gives me purpose. I'm getting attention from it. I'm going to be a whistleblower, and it's part of the human psyche.
It indeed is. And there is a rise of narcissism. And there is a rise of narcissism with any number of manifestations of pathologies. And it's depressing. It is. I mean, the idea of just understanding the world and of trying to seek truth in the historical events of the world and trying to put it into perspective and understand we may not like certain things of it, but it's the history of the world, and it's the history and the development and the progression of humankind. It is still a dangerous place. It always will be, until we get to some place where we evolve into something else, where we're not interested in wars and what all that means. We're not being driven by greed of the industrial complex to do that, and that comes in every possible way you can imagine. I mean, the amount of greed that goes on in the military-industrial complex is one level of things, but people that have never put on a uniform and don't work for the military or the government are out there ripping people off right and left as fast as they can come up with the next good scheme, right? There's a movie out now called Beekeeper with Strahan.
I've been meaning to watch that.
It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the premise of it is that there's a group that sends this thing to your computer that says your computer's been infected with a virus. Mm-hmm. Call this number and we'll sort it out. And then the fast talker on the phone, gets this person who doesn't know much about computers and is concerned. I mean, their first cue is if you are stupid enough to call because you actually think that somebody's going to remote into your computer and get rid of a virus, that they're now going to empty out your bank account.
Right.
Now, that's happening in India, but it's also happening with various cells within the U.S. That's what this movie's about, but it's fictional. But it is very real in terms of what happens. They're doing that. And, people that don't know enough to know that they're being conned turn around and lose their entire fortune because whatever money they have, they will step in because they have banks of people waiting. It's not like one guy.
Right.
Soon as they get you to download a software that allows them to have access to your computer, they zero you out. And they have ways to trick you to put in passwords and other things.
Right.
And there's a really funny YouTube video of there's a guy who is an American, but he is East Indian, and he attacks these guys. What he does is he calls up
Oh yeah, he has a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
He has a great YouTube channel.
It's amazing.
What's it called again? Fuck. He's got millions and millions of people that watch his stuff, and he calls back and he scams the scammers, or he catches them.
Yeah, he deletes their entire database.
Yeah, he fucks
while
with
they're
them.
talking to him, right? And it's amazing. My son, who's a detective, he at DC Metro, he's the one that turned me on to this. He goes like, "Dad, you got to watch this."
Oh, it's incredible what he does.
So I got hooked on it, and I must have watched like 50 episodes. And you're like, "Yeah, good, somebody's getting these bastards back," kind of thing. But I got busy with other stuff. So
yeah, but what you were saying about humanity not going in the direction of greed and wars and being territorial apes with thermonuclear weapons, do you think that's possible? I think we're too far down the road already. I don't see any possible thing that could change our trajectory.
Here's what I'm going to give you a physics explanation for that in lay terms. And any given population, if you can introduce an ideology into that population, that 10% of that population, in theory, will adopt fully with small variations, that ideology at that time can trigger a chain reaction that can eventually overcome the entire population sample to do that. I believe that if the right message, if the right transformative tools come along, I believe that we can do that. We're not ready now. We are in a destructive cycle of the global societal evolution. That's where we are. We've been in a protracted cycle of that. And we're not going to come out of it. We just came out of a 20-year war, 20 years of war. Mm-hmm. And that's never happened before. So think of the impact of that and the damage done to just the spiritual thoughts and hopes and dreams, or the human pathway that focuses on on a rebirth and a regrowth of humanity in a very positive way, starting with each individual, right? And passing on to the collective, and so it goes. And if you can reach that 10% and get there, you can start this chain reaction in just human thought and human processing. We're not telling enough of the good stories, and we're not being discerning enough to know when somebody's scamming us and trying to break us down and take us apart. And part of that, again, goes back to what I said to you, that all the studies are revealing that just our cognitive processing and our brain is changing because an entire generation has grown up with a cell phone in their hand, staring at it. I went some time ago to a restaurant on a Valentine's Day when I was dating somebody. I'm getting divorced, so I was with this person, and we were in this restaurant, and we were talking in the restaurant, and this waitress came up and said, I just want to say this. She goes, today when I came to work, I prayed that when I came to work, I would actually see people looking at each other and talking to them. Because every other time I come to work, couples will come in here and they sit on opposite sides of the table with their face in their phone, and the only time they look up is to give me their order, and then they go right back. They don't converse. They don't express anything, no facial contact. It's all in the body of the phone. And we know, based on research, that 8 hours a day with your face in your phone, texting, on social media, tweeting, Instagrams, all the other shit that's out there.
TikTok.
Right? Yeah, TikTok. And it is just consuming, and it's changing how we communicate. It's changing how we listen. It's changing our attention span. It's increasing levels of anxiety and irritability. It's all these things that it is nothing good about it, but it just keeps growing and no controls. People get in fights. They get in, it's like I told you, I was asked if I wanted to engage with this UFO guy who wanted to quibble with me about whether or not the unit had ever seen grays, right, in the off-planet historical target files. And I was asked that by Sean Hazlitt, and I said, absolutely not. Yeah,
he was asking you if you saw anything when you were doing remote viewing sessions for like the moon or something?
No, in a historical, there was a historical off-planet file drawer.
Okay.
And what that was is the unit was working off-planet targets. They would do them as general interest, let's go see. And there's a protocol for an open search outward. There's also specific targeted things. You could go to the dark side of the moon. You could go to Mars. You can go into Olympus Mons. You can go in Mons. You can go into lava tubes. You can go to and do all these things looking for alien life, alien civilizations.
And who came up with the idea to visit these certain spaces?
It kind of dovetails on the question you asked me when we started here about the pyramids.
That's the first place I'd want to take everybody.
Yeah. So that's where it started, and I don't actually know what the origins of it was, but I do know that it was there, and I do know that there was like this many sessions, in a file drawer that were there. And of course, Ed Dames has talked about it. I've talked about it. Mel Riley, before he passed away, talked about it. Lynn Buchanan has talked about it. Gabrielle Pettengale would talk about it, but she's passed now as well. And then you have to remember that there are still some people who say that no, the unit never did that. Well, it's like, yeah, the unit did, and maybe you didn't do it, but that maybe you were never invited to go do it because of that. I don't know. But the program manager talked about it, Fern Gavin. I don't know if the guy that replaced him ever talked about it or did it, but it was done. And as I said, there's a protocol for an open search outward where you can actually, it's difficult to describe without, without a graphic, but it is basically you're doing a Cartesian coordinate process. So you are taking a theoretical, figurative cube of the known universe is what you're doing. And we know that the universe has an edge now. It's not an infinite. We know it has an edge, and there are all sorts of models that predict how the universe actually looks on the edges based on just the measurement of the separation of galaxies and the speeds, et cetera, and the directions, that they've modeled this now to say it could look like this and it could look like this. And those mathematical models are really interesting. But what fascinates me is that it says that the universe is no longer an infinite. It has an edge. It came from somewhere, and it is expanded outward into somewhere. And the question is, what's it expanding into? What is it expanding into? And does a black hole take part of this, which are still theoretical, but does a black hole, based on what we believe that they are, is that pulling in material from this universe and pushing it through the event horizon into another space, just like our universe is in? Because when you take us back to a point of singularity, it's not saying poof, magically it appeared. It's saying that it came into this dimensional space and expanded outward. So it's a fascinating idea. And the mathematical models talk about the quantum foam of space-time. And they're saying it's like the number of universes, it's like the foam on the head of a beer, right? They just keep, some of them have these pathways that loop back into the universe at another place. Some of them have the pathway that goes to another and expands into it from a point of singularity, back into another space, another dimension. It's not what the many worlds theories mean. That's not what that means. Okay. That's a totally different concept. But it is the idea that there are multiple universes and they are sharing, and there are pathways between them. And if you come from one of those universes in another dimension where you have the ability for interstellar travel or, full time, space, whatever, from a sci-fi perspective, then it's feasible. It's very real. I think it's quite logical to assume that you would have the ability to pop into this universal dimension, or maybe just pop in transit from one to going to another dimension. We just happen to be the countryside that you travel through. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's very possible. But those theories are there, and we do know that the universe has an edge now. So that's an amazing concept,
Have you ever seen that show called Man in the High Castle?
No.
This is about the P.K. Dick book, where it's the theme of it is basically it takes place in an alternate universe where the Nazis won World War II and they took over North America, and it's basically split with Japan. And they developed some sort of technology where they can put you in this chamber and they hook you up to this device. And certain people have the powers to be able to hop from one universe to the other, and people are going back and forth between our reality right now. This takes place in like the 50s or 60s, and go back and forth to the dimension where the Nazis won the war. And it's fascinating. It's similar to kind of like what you're talking about, I think, where there's basically alternate outcomes of like every single decision that we make can lead to, like, it's like the idea when you hit a golf ball, if the angle of the iron is just a millimeter that way, the trajectory is going to be like hundreds of yards, depending on how short of a change you make here. So like every single decision we make could be, I could decide to do this or do that, and that would lead to a million different outcomes. It's similar kind of like what you were talking about with the Titanic and the event arc of time in the last podcast.
Yeah.
And to be able to have the technology to transverse between all those different dimensions or universes or multiverses.
Probabilities, different probabilities, different probabilities. Yeah.
So
Potentials, they're referred to.
So is that similar to what you guys were trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, you took this known universe and again, figuratively, and with a Cartesian coordinate system, you're able to you're slicing it up. So you're slicing it up. So you have an X 1 through 100, Y 1 through 100, Z axes 1 through 100. That gives you a cube based on whatever you're going to pull. So if it's X 50, Y 65, and Z 62, it's going to, when you match those together, you're going to have a cube inside of the cube. But it's going to have an address now, right?
Right.
Because it has a Cartesian coordinate. Now you can pull that one out and you can further slice it down again through the Cartesian coordinate process. And that gives you yet another cube inside the already smaller cube. And you can keep doing that again 3 times. So you have the statistical relevance of what it is you're doing. And then you now have an address in the known universe or the universe that you can now actually have a program manager remove the Cartesian coordinate and assign the 2 sets of 4 numbers based on the concept of that target. The concept of that target now is you take a team of 20 remote viewers and you say your intention for them now, as you assign those coordinates, is for you to have a 20 viewer shotgun blast into that piece of the universe, to that address, which is still enormous, right? And the theory is if there is something pronounced there, then in a shotgun blast of 20 viewers, some of them will stumble upon it, and some of them will stumble upon something else. But when you do the analysis on the data, now you're looking for the correlation in the data. You're looking for sketches that correlate. You're looking for other sensory data that correlates. Now, is this a fascinating thing? Hell yeah. Can you turn around and tell people that, oh, look what we discovered, out in space? No, you can't. I mean, you can do it, but you're just contributing to the mess because what that is anecdotal.
Right.
It's experiential, anecdotal. Is it fun to do? Do remote viewers like to do it? Yeah, but that's as far as that goes. But in this story, I said on the podcast with Sean, I said, I looked all through those files and I never saw anybody sketching grays or mentioning grays as alien life forces. And they saw life forms and they saw other alien civilizations, but never that. It wasn't in the file. I then said, out of 25,000 students, not all of which have ever been able to do off-planet targets, because I don't do that until you get into really advanced stuff like Mastery and Explorer Group. You'll get an opportunity to work some of the old historical files. And that way you then get to see the feedback that was generated in the late 70s and the 80s. And that's kind of cool for people to see. But I always couch it. It's anecdotal. It was an experience. I just want you to have that experience and remember what you perceived. But don't start wrapping your life around that. And nobody ever produced little grays who worked those targets. So in making that pronouncement, this guy reads that and then turns right around, takes my quote, or hears it, quotes me on Twitter and on Facebook and God knows wherever else, and then slams that back to Sean. Well, maybe Morehouse would like to comment on this because Lynn said he saw grays. It's like, Okay, I didn't say that Lynn didn't see grays. I said that was not in the historical file. Who the fuck knows why it's not? Maybe Lynn kept his own remote viewing session. I don't know. A lot of people did. A lot of people, if they thought what they were doing might be perceived as controversial, would just take their shit home. Classified, but take it home. Or shred it, because they just didn't want it left there. And other people would take it home because they wanted proof of something that they had done. That happened a lot.
What kind of stuff were people seeing, or did you see when you were remote viewing off-world targets?
There's an entire array of that. We should do that as a separate thing. But, I mean, remote viewers were describing this seeming like a capillary system that was moving, negative and positive. And that's a very, very simplistic perspective, but balancing the universe like a capillary system. Probably 20 years after that was being already perceived by thousands of viewers that were working those targets, on the cover of Scientific American, there is this concept sketch showing this flowing like a capillary system in the universe that's moving, energy from one place to the other, and it's put in there and portrayed as this lime green against the black darkness of a universal cube, of a universe cube. It's a cubed universe, for illustration purposes, and it has this capillary system in it that looks absolutely like a lymphatic system in a human being. And it's a concept that, dark energy or something else that's being moved around. And I was just fascinated by that. But that viewers were describing that. They were describing this thing, that it was like standing in a flow or floating in a flow. There you go. That's it. Oh, no, That's not it. That's actually a Hubble telescope image.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There is a
oh, wow.
It looks similar to that, but it's actually a Scientific American cover. Let me check and see if I've got it here. We don't want to hold.
Here's a universe structure right there.
There you go. Yeah.
So the universe.
Oh, that's
Very
bizarre.
similar.
It is very much so. Let me see if I have this.
What did you guys find on the dark side of the moon?
Nothing.
Nothing. Damn it.
I never had anybody do it.
Oh, really?
And there wasn't anything significant from, There was nothing. There were craft and there were beings that, many people over the decades have described them like Vikings looking things, but giant, very large and muscular, and, a wall that was much like what's behind you there in the sound foam, but they're touching the wall. They're touching the wall to make things move in and out, which are part of the control mechanisms of the ship, is how it was, described. But it's, there's all different kinds of things that
Holy
came
shit.
up with it.
Is that it?
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So you can see, and looking at that is that's another version of it. But they're depicting, the flow of energy structures within the universe that are maintaining balance. So you can't have all negative in one spot and all positive in another spot. To put it in lay terms, the lymphatic system is balancing it. This lymphatic or capillary system is balancing things in the universe. And the viewers, their perception of it is, as they're detecting, encoding, and objectifying, is their sense is that they're actually standing, like being underwater and being in a current flow, a directional current flow. And then there are pieces of things that they perceive that go by them, and they all perceive it somewhat similarly, and others, it correlates, and some of them are, completely a fabrication of their own, how they're perceiving it. Imagine being a human being, finding yourself perceiving that. How do you describe it? If you don't have anything in your experience database,
Right.
something you've actually encountered or experienced and have knowledge of, you lack the language to describe it. So your brain does the best it can with what it comes up with. And I've seen everything from people saying it was like television sets going by and little individual stories in each of the television sets.
Oh, wow.
Or it was like pieces of film rolling life stories going by me. I mean, everything from that to other people calling it, a cosmic hot tub because
Wow.
of the vibration they felt in their bodies as they were standing in this. And all of these manifestations of pictures of, them sketching themselves, like trying to maintain balance there while all of this strong current of energy flow is coming at them. And then they're showing it, bifurcating and bifurcating again and moving off in different directions. It's fascinating to see this. Again, the only time we've ever had some sort of a confirmation of that, other than the correlation that comes over the years, over the decades from thousands of viewers doing the target, is just a correlation of the data and
Right.
sketches, et cetera. But then when Scientific American coughs this up, and it's an artist concept based on new theories that are evolving and what this is and what it might be and what it might look like, that's pretty fascinating correlation again, right? Still, it's not proven that exists, but it is being worked on, and the theory is that it is there, and it does serve a purpose, and this is what it looks like, folks. So it was a fascinating thing, and it just rolls on. I mean, there are dozens of different kinds of civilizations described. There were dozens of different kinds of beings described, but there were no grays. And by God, I am not going to get in a pissing contest with some UFO dude over whether or not, I'm not going to go defend my comments. I couldn't. First of all, I couldn't care less. I mean, I had nothing to do with anything like that. And I'm not going to tit for tat with some guy because he wants to pick. He has a bone to pick with me about grays. It's like I couldn't care less. I didn't say Lynn didn't see him. I just said I didn't see him.
Right.
I speak to what I know. I didn't say anything about him. If he saw grays, bravo, he saw grays. The guy was looking for validation is what he's doing, and he's also looking for me to get engaged with him in an argument so he can say, yeah, well, Lynn did it. So what he's done is, in some big flurry of emotion, he's quoted me and tossed it out there to the world, and then thrown down the gauntlet. To which I'm like, listen to me, I don't care. So no, I'm not giving you not one scintilla of my time. I will not spend 2 neurons in my brain to engage with that with you.
Right.
Have at it. Have fun. But as we got talking about, it's like that community, they just run around with their, looking for a reason to pour gasoline on themselves and set themselves alight and just bump into each other and catch each other on fire. They're pissed off. They feel betrayed. Everybody should be doing this and that. And it's like, Jesus, my God, how exhausting that must be for you to just run around being pissed off and, and charging windmills like that. It's a work of fantasy fiction, and you just stop it. I mean, God, stop it. It's God.
Do you know if there are still any active remote viewing programs going on, or was that all kiboshed?
Here's what I will say is that I'll tell you what I know. I know that the intelligence collection methodology that was utilized in the remote viewing programs held its own and served its purpose. Did it have detractors? Of course it did. It's a very controversial intelligence collection methodology. But every intelligence collection methodology has its weaknesses. all of them, especially things like human intelligence. It can be misinterpreted. It can be misinformation. It can be an outright lie. It can be total confusion. It could be anything. And there are 35 different intelligence collections methodologies now that are in play that include, cyber intelligence and sat intelligence and photo electronic and you name it. And still, human is there. Human is there. As fallible as it is. Human intelligence put us into a war in Iraq. It was used to put us into a war in Iraq. And it was fouled and it was wrong, but it was accepted and utilized to spin us into a war in 2003. So, remote viewing was neither, more accurate than any of the others, nor less accurate than any of the others. All of them are subject to human interpretation, right? No matter what it is, it has to be looked at by an analyst and interpreted and value given to it or not. So all of those intelligence collection methodologies, they all have their ups and downs. They all sway with the pulse of what they're being asked to look at and the skill sets and devotion of the analysts that are working the data analysis for the customer. The CIA put a great deal of money into this program, and they did so at a time when they were absolutely convinced that the Soviets and the Chinese were running full steam ahead in developing this kind of warfare as an intelligence collection tool. They did so at a time when Gottlieb and Dulles and others felt that what was happening is mind control was now going to be the new weapon. The new battlefield was the human mind. In fact, Dulles, speaking to a Princeton University alumni group, stood up and said the new battlefield coming before us in the 70s and the 80s and in the 90s and beyond is the battlefield of the mind. And the world is trying to find ways to control the human mind and to infuse ideologies into the human mind to be able to diffuse a national ideology and identity and supplant that with another national ideology and identity. Look around and tell me you don't think that that has actually come to be. And so the MK Ultra project was done out of absolute fear and terror that we didn't know how to do any of this stuff. We didn't know how to control the human mind. We didn't know how to break it and then rebuild it. We didn't know any of those things. And if we know that they're going to be doing it, certainly that was the great fear. But I also want to say this. That great fear came primarily, it did not come from those Nazi documents. It came from human intelligence sources. There are no documents that have ever existed that anybody knows about, and there are no documents in the CIA files that talk about what they were told that spawned, this effort, which actually was discussed in 1970, and then in 1972, the CIA let that sole source contract to SRI International. That's when the psychic arms race started. What was going on in MK Ultra was mind control. Did they discuss, ESP? I'm sure they probably did. They were trying to figure out a way to build remote interject assassins, meaning just like in Manchurian Candidate. That is not far-fetched. And they had indicators that the North Koreans, through the Chinese, that they were working on these things. And that fear rocked their world. And these are the guys that are supposed to protect us. So what are they doing? People look at them and go, well, what assholes, that they did this. We asked them to do that shit, to do those things. Now, do we ask them to use unwitting, compliant experimentation on human beings? Absolutely not. Those were subcategories of their major categories of their sub-projects, they called them. And those sub-projects, they crossed a line. And they were doing unwitting experiments on unwitting people.
Right.
And that's outrageous. But you have to understand their motivation for it was not a maniacal, nefarious motivation. It was a great fear that they did not know what the Soviet and the Chinese knew. They did not know that. And that started with the HUMENT stuff. The idea that, that there's something beyond the physical in every human being may indeed have come out of the German, records trove that everybody is referencing now. But I told you what the main categories are. Folklore, an atlas of folklore, and, another, discussion and dialogue on Britain and other places within Europe and what's happening, the Norwegian thing, where they were trying to get a joint science project there to study language and culture, again, supporting this Aryan ideology that was big in Nazism. If you read that book I told you to read, or I suggested you read, you'll see all of this. And the dowsing project was just, this whole idea of the occult being strong within the Aryan culture and within all of the elements of government and other things in Hitler's Reich, Hitler's Germany, is just not accurate.
So if you were to guess, you would say, no, we don't have a current active remote viewing program going on today.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing me back to that, because we did venture off. I think we do.
Oh, we do.
My point that I was trying to do with the backstory was to say that it's too much money and it's too much time, and it's as effective as many other intelligence collection methodologies. I do not for 1 second believe that it has been shut down and not ever used again. What I do believe is this. Once it was exposed in Psychic Warrior, once they knew that they weren't going to be able to stop that book, I hate that title, but once they knew that they couldn't stop that book, they launched their counter campaign, right? Which was then to minimize it, to divert disinformation, all this stuff coming out of the CIA talking about these things. And I say this all the time, the CIA is not the Central Information Agency. When the CIA is talking to the press about a project that is closing down, they're talking to the press about that and telling these stories and leaking these stories. They're doing it for a reason. It's damage control. Oh, yeah, we did it. We spent $20 million on it. We did it for, 25 years or 30 years, but we're not doing it anymore. We found it to be of no value. That takes everybody turns around and goes, oh, okay, mission accomplished. Oh, well, now we're going to declassify and release all of this based on the FOIA request. Yeah, they're releasing everything based on that FOIA request about a unit that they told you that they were closing down because that unit had been exposed, right? And understand all of the documents in that FOIA, 27,000 some odd pages. I've looked through those. And I know that Joe McMoneagle, Paul Smith, Skip Atwater, and maybe to a certain degree, Lynn Buchanan, all sat and went through all of those documents and decided what would be released, help the CIA decide what would be released. So they were able then, by removing, redacting, omitting documents and allowing certain documents, to paint a particular picture of the unit and the unit successes, to codify all of the announcements that it wasn't all that accurate and therefore we consider it of no value. That insulates and buffers the ongoing program. where I'm sure they probably called people in, and they probably took it and put it into a LIMDIS, a top secret LIMDIS or a secret LIMDIS, where it's limited distribution, meaning they read them the Riot Act and read them onto a whole nother level of security classification with much more severe consequences. They learn that lesson often, that if they keep downgrading, the classification of something, it still goes from top secret to secret, and then it's secret but not really secret, and it just keeps going down, and they don't change the code names, and they don't do other things. They leave people in the program for 15 years. All of this goes completely against counterintelligence strategies. Counterintelligence strategies say that the reason code names are theoretically supposed to be changed every 6 months to a year, and the reason people are pushed in and pushed out and locations, is because they don't want anybody that's looking for that unit to start tying people, places, code names, etc., and work to a place where they now know what that is. That's why that's supposed to change. And they stopped doing that. They would change the code name every 6 years or something. Well, it's foolish. So I'm sure that what they have done now is move that collection methodology and continue to use it, only much deeper and much more heavily secured. And the people that are there learning and who are serving in that capacity would never get away with what I got away with. They just won't next time. They learned that lesson. And I didn't do it to try to destroy the unit. I told the story because I believe that what I experienced there changed my life. And I believe that once I got over the confusion of of what was happening and learned how to live my life with that kind of knowledge, that it became a powerful tool for me. And I thought, and I wanted to have that shared. There was really no other reason behind the doing of that. I just thought I knew I would probably get spanked. I just didn't realize I would get spanked as hard as I got spanked.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that it would still be going. It would be very foolish for them to end that.
The amount of effort it takes to keep the lie alive is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
What was Project Torn Image? And how did you get catapulted into that?
Ed Dames, actually. Ed left the remote viewing unit and went to Torn Image to be a researcher for them. And we talked all the time, and he said, "Hey, look, they're looking for a special ops officer to head up their counter-narcotics program." This is a point at when the DOD is really spinning up their efforts in the war on drugs. And this is when you're starting to see, like the development of EPIC down in El Paso, Texas, which is a joint intelligence collections, center. So you got DEA and DOD and all these other federal law enforcement agencies, everybody coming together. So it was a big effort. And DOD was looking around for who can we get to play in this. Now, so I went to this interview, and, some guy in plain clothes, and I was in plain clothes, and, he interviews me, and he has my ORB officer record brief, so he knows where I've been and what I've done and what my skill sets are. And so I get hired, and I process out of the remote viewing unit, and I go to this building, not in Washington, D.C., but in another city. And it's probably well past this point now, but it's called Allied Communications. And it's not a military facility. It's a very secure SCIF, and in it there are 35 people. There are admin support guys that run things, finance guy, right, logistics, and et cetera. There's a commander, deputy commander, XO, but everybody's in plain clothes. And everybody is what is called a great skiller. So to be there, you move off the Department of the Army Special Access roster, the DASR. So I don't know if I've told you this. So I'm a Special Operations Infantry officer, so my personnel file is an infantry branch. When I went to Royal Cape, the activity, right? The subject of the Killer Elite book, my file, there's a DASR manager, Department of the Army Special Access roster. They go over to an infantry branch and they say, we want Captain Morehouse's file. He's being moved to DASR. When that happens, they give the file. Your file is no longer an infantry branch. An infantry branch goes into where your file was, or the DASR folks do, and they type in there, SM not on file. So if somebody looks for you based on social number or your name and your rank, just trying to find you in some way from some personnel center, computer, service member not on file. You are now gone off that record. And that's Department of the Army Special Access roster. It goes into another little skiff in those days in the Hoffman building, and it's managed by special people. When that was still there when I went to StarGate or Grill Flame when I was there. But when I moved to Torn Image, which was a strategic deception unit, and I'll define that. Now what happens is you move into the category called great skills. Great skillers. You're referred to as a great skill. This is fucking freaky because now what they do is your file is picked up by some curmudgeon inside some little tiny compound thing with like 15-foot high fences and triple concertina wire all around them. They go to the DASR branch, collect your file, and then they take your file into the DASR control building. Into the Great Skills Control Building. And now you are issued a civilian ID card. And you are instructed that you are to tell family, friends, anybody else that you are not in the Army anymore. You are now working as a government contractor, civilian contractor. And they give you a rating, GS-12 or GS whatever. Yeah, I didn't do that. I didn't go home and tell my wife I resigned. And I sure as fuck wasn't going to tell my dad. I told him and he was like, nah, no, you're not. He goes, you didn't. He goes, no, you didn't. What are you into now? So when I go there, they now are like, you don't know anything about strategic deception. I sure don't. What is it? So here's the real generic thing about a strategic deception. It has to be a lie perpetrated, designed, perpetrated, that can be sustained for up to 10 years. Longer is better, but up to 10 years. I'll give you an example. Anthrax, an anthrax oral antidote, or an anthrax, preventative method, a pill. They will put that out there, and they will put that out there because, and they will make the science up. They will create it. They have people who design the medical science about how that works and everything about how this oral antidote or preventative measure, how it keeps anthrax from killing a soldier. They tell all battalion surgeons. They give them the, instructions for use, all the supporting literature, the research, et cetera, et cetera. It's guarded, carefully guarded. They don't want to let that out because they don't want the Soviet Union or China, who have those kinds of biological weapons, they don't want them to know. They push it forward into all of the battlefield potentials, like in Germany, right? When the Soviet Union is on the other side of the Berlin Wall, they push it all out there. They rotate stocks, new lot numbers, new expiration dates, and all this stuff, right? They put that out there. It was aspirin. It was nothing but aspirin. And they have a winning pharmaceutical company that packages it in blister packs. They have the boxes, the instructions for use literature, all of the medical literature, which is all ginned up and it's all bullshit and fake. and it's thrown out to them. And it's amazing that, physicians don't know because they don't typically read that stuff. They have other things to do, but it's out there. And soldiers are walking around thinking that, we're going to be issued the anthrax antidote. So just in case, we can buffer ourselves with this oral antidote. The truth is it wasn't real, but what it did do is it caused the Soviets to scratch their heads. It caused them to then have to figure, are we going to have to reformulate? Is our anthrax now worthless? Are we going to have to figure out some way about doing this? Or it's a deadly toxin, but we caused them to have to relook at it, to expend time, money, resources, personnel, years of research trying to figure out if what we are doing is real or if it's not. And we're very good at building the medical literature supporting this to make them do that. They have to spend a lot of time to figure it out, to unravel the lie.
Right.
Okay? That's a strategic deception, to do something like that. And that's what the purpose of a strategic deception is. It's to unravel the intended target, to make them exhaust themselves in trying to figure something out. My mission that was given to me was to develop a strategic deception targeting the 3 major drug cartels in developing and importing cocaine into the United States. Medellin, Cali, and then the other one, Ochoa or something like that. Not Ochoa. I can't remember what it was. So that was my target. That was what I was supposed to be doing. So what I want to say to the people listening here is I'm going to present this to you as I would present the strategic deception. This means that part of what I'm going to say is real and part of it is not real. And it's up to you to try to figure out the part that's real. So I had to come up with a way to do this, and that meant that I needed to talk to smart people in different areas to try to figure out what am I going to target. How am I going to, because my mission statement was top secret, Lambda, and I was told that my job is to cause an intra-cartel war. Mm-hmm. How the f*** am I going to do that?
And what was the purpose of this war?
To stop the flow of cocaine, illicit drugs in the form of cocaine into the United States.
Okay.
We're in the war on drugs. That's what we're about. Mm-hmm. Intercepting, shipments that were coming in on freighters, welded into, the double walls of freighters and hulls and fast boats and you name it, right? It was coming in everywhere it could, tons of it all the time. This is the time, if you look at the James Webb, there's a movie called Kill the Messenger. That actually happened. And people should watch that because this is the time when this is starting to happen. And so I go to Los Alamos, and at Los Alamos, I talked to a botanist. I didn't even know that Los Alamos had botanists.
What year was this?
This was 90.
90, okay.
89, 90. So I talked to a botanist at Los Alamos, and at a recommendation of one of the guys in the unit. And in talking with the botanist, I say, look, I don't know how to do this. But I need to put something together that can be real and as real as we can make it. And I am told, with this guy with his team all around, this is a nice challenge. He said, let me tell you how this works. He goes, you step outside here into the garden, and there are plant pathogens that are unique to the entire garden. He said, but there are also, if I go to that plant, there are pathogens that are unique only to that plant. They only live on that plant. So these can be bacteria, comicites, fungi, viruses. They could be a whole bunch of different things. Microscopic, a little bit bigger than microscopic, they are there. So the idea was we needed to harvest cocaine plants, put them in these little biospheres. We needed to bring them back And they then needed to examine each of these plants that are grown in the hectares, still in Colombia, but in different parts of Colombia, in the areas controlled by the 3 different cartels. And to isolate a suite of organisms unique to each region and the hectares of the coca plant being grown in that region. Why did we want to find these pathogens? Because out of the pathogens, the lineup of them, let's say you find that there are 10 pathogens unique to the coca plant, slightly different in the different regions. Now the testing begins to try to find which pathogen is most easily bioengineered, most easily trainable, most easily, designed now or redesigned to do something different than just be a plant pathogen. A suite of organisms are isolated for each of the region. This suite of organisms are now painstakingly bioengineered over a process of about 6 months of trial and error, bioengineered to attack and destroy the psychoactive ingredient in cocaine, to go after and break the molecular chain so that the coca, when processed into cocaine, is now inert. It can be done. It can be done. And it was tested, and it worked. And it was tested, and it meant that when they tested cocaine, when they put it in a little plastic pouch and they shake it up, and if it turns blue, they're testing for metabolites. They're not checking for the psychoactive ingredient in cocaine. They're checking for metabolites. That lets them know when it turns dark blue, that's cocaine. This substance is cocaine. So this now meant that we had a substance that would render cocaine once processed, or even as the leaf coming in, even before it is based and paste, it can be rendered inert. And they will never know that it is inert because there's no way they can check that. If somebody throws a bunch of leaves in their mouth and chews it up, it'll still taste bitter, and there may be some minimal effect out of it, but it will not be the psychoactive effect that they're looking for on the other end of the distribution chain after it's been processed with all the precursor chemicals like toluene, gasoline, kerosene, and everything else that they use to create it. Mm-hmm. So the next issue was, how do we deliver it? So I was then introduced at Los Alamos to somebody that worked in the area of microencapsulation. So now the idea was utilizing microencapsulation, because in microencapsulation, you can build a microencapsulation mechanism that can be triggered based on time, based on temperature, based on moisture, or based on dryness. Anything. You can make that happen. You can build a microencapsulation package so that if it touches steel, it opens up. Or if it touches wood, it opens up. Wow. It's a very designable process. And so in the microencapsulation now, we wanted it to be able to drop into the soil and be part of that. And at the first sign of moisture or at a certain point in time, this encapsulation was to open, and it was to release the pathogen, which would go directly to the root ball of the plant that it was near it. That's what the pathogen did. It was it wanted the coca plant. So that was all developed, and the delivery mechanism was now going to be this. We knew what each of the cartels had, all kinds of things, vehicles, planes, helicopters. And so knowing what the tail numbers and the paint schemes and the type of aircraft that each of the cartels had in their inventory, we secured planes that were identical, matched the paint scheme and the tail numbers, and outfitted them with spray nozzles, like if you were a crop duster, on the trailing edge of the wings and underneath the belly of the aircraft. And inside were tanks that were pressurized, that were filled with a microencapsulated pathogen. And the idea was you would take a Medellin plane with that marking, and you would fly it over into the Cali cartel hectares, and you would spray their fields and go spray the next one and go spray the next one. And you would spray the next one until you were empty and come back. And then you might take the same plane and fly it over to the other cartel, whose name I cannot remember, and introduce and spray that there. Then you would take another plane from Cali, and you would use that one and spray Medellin and go spray over here. Now, they didn't know. They weren't catching on to who it was. But what started to happen was they noticed, and the reports were back, that somebody is spraying us, and it's the plane, it's Cali's plane doing this. The trigger had not yet been pulled. The encapsulation was now unfolding, breaking, and these pathogens were now in the root balls of these plants, and they were designed to stay in the root ball, meaning it's self-inoculating. Every time it's harvested and the plant grows back up again, the pathogens reattack because they just continue to populate and expand and re-inoculate the next plant. So it's harvested again, same thing. We chemically washed kilos of cocaine to remove the psychoactive ingredient from cocaine, because this was the trigger. Now introduced into the supply train, let's just say the supply train for distribution in Los Angeles or the distribution in Detroit. You introduce hundreds of kilos of cocaine that are completely inert into those supply trains. And what happens is they test it. It's there. They think it's pure. They might even, taste it or, snort it. And there was a chance that some of them might turn around and go, this is really bad, or it's been cut bad, or something else. But even if it was discovered immediately once it got into the supply train and was thrown to the distributor there, this was now going, even if it didn't get to the street. But if it got to the street, even better, because now what would happen is, as people discovered that this was worthless, that it was inert, it would begin an inner cartel war. Up this distribution chain would be this revolt to the product that would end up having people kill people. And this was looked at and considered as a cost, a collateral damage to doing this, to breaking this network apart, to put that in there. So that trigger got pulled, and that fire started back the other direction. It did not take long then for what was happening on the street in different distribution pathways for each of the cartels, for the cartels then to start questioning why this was happening. And then you have a few people that get leaked information about the reason this is happening is because somebody is spraying the coca plants, and this process is happening in the fields, in the processing labs, and that's where it's happening. It is believed that this is one of the reasons why Pablo Escobar, once he had reached this point where he had to live in the prison of his own making, that he brought the Cali guys over to his prison and confronted them with this, and confronted them with the fact that they now owed him money because of what they were doing. Of course, that's been flavored differently in some dramatical portrayals of this, but he killed them. He blamed them for that. So now we have the inter and the intra-cartel war. We have all three cartels fighting against each other from the leadership on down, down to all the gunslingers, and we have the Sicarios killing the other Sicarios, and you have the distribution chain consuming itself. Wow. That went on for 6 months, and the damage was severe enough that it was completely shut down almost immediately. I tried to question why that was happening and what the justification for it was, and the deputy commander of Torn Image brought me over and said, "You really are one little naive prick, aren't you?" He goes, "You don't understand why this got shut down?" He goes, "They don't want this to end."
Right.
They don't want this to end like that and that suddenly. And the damage and the collateral damage is not what they want. But it became at least one part of the downfall of those cartels, led to the death of Pablo Escobar, the brothers that ran the Cali dead by Pablo. I don't know what happened to the other one, but eventually all of this collapsed on itself. So I felt like the deception, the mission was a success. And then all of that ability to do that was moved into Mexico. So the war just migrates. The war migrates and the leadership changes, and it's right back there. Again, bigger than it was before, and it's right on our doorstep now. But now it's the war as you expected it to be. It's intercept, interdict, seize, try to get to the head of the distribution, et cetera, like that, all conducted by federal, state, and local law enforcement. And doing stuff at the DOD level like that probably will not happen again, but that's a strategic deception.
Wow. Was this ever declassified?
No.
But I assume a lot of the major players are dead and gone now, so it's...
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really only started telling the story probably within the last 10 years, and I was doing this 30 years ago, in the 90s, right? So, and then I left and went to Commander General Staff College, where I just tried to disappear out of all of that.
Oh my
And I
Lord.
once tried to actually pitch it as a fictional story in Hollywood when I came out of the Army, and my manager and my agent turned around and went, "No, f- you. We have families. We're not, this was now 95, 96, and they're like, yeah, fuck you, we're not."
Only like 5 years after.
Yeah, they're like, we're not attaching our name to that, and we're not going to run you around this town. He goes, "There's probably somebody out there, looking for you, and we don't want them looking for us. So yeah, don't ever tell us that again. Like this kind of thing. We don't want to hear it." So it never saw the light of day, and that's probably a good thing, because they're probably right. There are probably a lot of people that might have done something. I don't know.
So it ended up breaking the supply chain and the distribution of the cocaine from these cartels into the U.S., and that's not what they wanted. They wanted these cartels.
Not all roadways, but it took a big chunk out of distribution into big cities, because if you take somebody, let's say heroin, and you had Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes, right? If you had Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes gunning for each other because the product that they bought through the distribution process turns out to be inert, you're going to take the head off those two big snakes. And
it's going to
yes,
two
there'll
more
be
heads.
somebody else that'll come in
Yeah.
or try to come in, but you still caused a huge rift in there, and a lot of people doubting what they're getting, and the price will go up, right? Everything will happen, and not in a good way. So it has a very definite destructive effect on those. Nobody said, nobody said in briefing and developing the program, nobody said that you have to limit the destructive force of this or the destructive capability of that. Nobody said that. I don't actually think they thought anything would happen, is what I think. I think I thought, what's he going to... Nobody had any bright ideas except this botanist.
Wow.
So, nobody really knew what to do. And I just figured out how, once we knew that could happen, then how to get the biggest destructive effect out of the mission to cause an intra-cartel war. And it worked. Better than people thought it would work. And I think people got very concerned. I also think that people got concerned about money, and people got because, let's face it, there are people in decision-making places that profit from that stuff by turning, their head the other way. And now all of a sudden, it's not just gangsters that profit from that stuff. It isn't. Again, read or watch Kill the Messenger, and then there are several other stories that parallel that, and you'll get an idea for how scary this is and how far up it goes, and how people shut that shit down when people started to tell the truth about what they saw. And James Webb never recovered from it. James or Jim, he never recovered from it. He actually committed suicide. He never worked as a reporter again, because the CIA and other agencies that had their tentacles into, like the New York Times and New York Post and those kinds of things, they shut him down. They discredited him, and he told the truth. He told absolutely the truth. They reached contacts in Colombia and other places that told him the truth about what it was and where they were and how much money there was, et cetera, and where they were bringing it. Los Angeles went apeshit, the black community in Los Angeles, when he was reporting on what was happening, because there were agency ties into bringing cocaine into the United States through Mena, Arkansas,
right,
and being pushed into Los Angeles and being distributed in the black community, where Freeway Ricky Ross was turning cocaine into crack cocaine and distributing it. And a huge chunk of the money coming back was going in to fund the Contra effort.
Contras, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when our good friend Billy Clinton was the governor of Mena, Arkansas.
Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. Who actually intervened with the state attorney general when the guy that was actually running the cocaine import into Mena bailed him out, when every fucking law enforcement agency in Arkansas and the government came after this guy and got him.
Barry Seal?
Yep.
The pilot?
Yep. He ended up, of course, being killed by the Medellin cartel because
the Ochoa brothers, I think whacked him. I actually had a guy on this podcast who was a pilot. He grew up very religious in it was Georgia or Alabama, and he wanted to be a missionary pilot. He ended up moving to Santa Barbara, working for the fire department. And then one day someone came by, because he was a pilot. He was a very good pilot. He flew planes all the time. He owned his own plane. He was a fucking broke firefighter. And like, hey, you want to make like $300,000 this weekend? Flying pot?
How do you say no?
Go pick up some pot in Mexico. That escalated to, do you want to make $1 million on Friday? Bringing some Coke back? And this guy, Roger, ended up hiring Barry Seal as his employee. And he told the whole story in this podcast. It was fascinating. And there was a story after Barry Seal got busted. Barry said, Roger, I need you to meet me at a restaurant to talk about some stuff. So they met at a restaurant in Santa Barbara, and they sat down at the table, and Barry was like very like nervous. And then Roger was sitting there, was like, what do you got to say to me, Barry? And Barry Seal looks around, and then Roger looks around like this, and sees a bunch of guys like at tables by themselves. He goes, DEA agents? And Barry Seal goes, every one of them. And then he like put his hands over his face and just started crying. The DEA agent came over and sat at the table next to him and said to Roger, Roger, you can either fly to Miami first class with your wife tomorrow, or you can fly there in chains. It's up to you.
Oh, man.
And he ended up not testifying. He didn't testify against the Ochoa brothers or any of those guys. And he ended up doing like, I want to say it was like 40 years.
Yeah, mandatory
in prison.
sentencing. Yeah.
And Barry got whacked because he's the one who snitched on everybody.
Yep.
Wow, man.
Yeah, very dangerous game to be playing in. And me and my, my typical self with all of that, you kind of take on this air of invincibility because you're a ranger and stuff like that. And you kind of think like, I'm not worried. But then you have these nights when you're sitting there going like, shit, I probably should have really been worried. That was a dangerous game to be playing. And the only thing that you had that protected you from that was the classification of the unit and, what it was all about. And nobody could ever put you together with anything because you're a civilian. But they told me one time when I went to Epic, they said the fact that you parked your car and got out and came in this building, they said they have better counter surveillance and better, they have as good as we've got, in fact, better.
Really?
They go, your picture was taken when you showed up, where you're going, and probably by this afternoon, they will know who you are, and they will know what your background is, and they will know if you have a family, and they will know where your family is. He goes, this is what we live under, because they have billions of dollars to put into that, and that's not our budget in doing what they're doing there. So I don't know if it's still that way, but I would submit I'm sure it is.
I had a guy in here he reports on all the cartels. He lives right on the border of Mexico and in Texas, and he reports for he's an independent journalist, but he does freelance work for a bunch of big news outlets like Vice and Business Insider, and he has lots of contacts inside of these Mexican cartels that he talks to, and that he has very exclusive relationships with them. And he found out recently, he wrote a report, I think it was in November, that one of the cartels, I think it was the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, is buying licenses to the military spy technology. So there's people that are in the Mexican military that are selling these licenses to the cartels. And this technology is, it's basically like what the military use to track bad guys. And all they have to do is type in a phone number or type in someone's social security number or address, and they can live track anybody's phone. And this guy, he met with them to confirm that this was real, pulled up the software right in front of him, typed in, he's like, let me try it. So my friend Luis typed in his buddy's information to see if he could track him. Live tracked him exactly where he was in California at that time. The cartels have this now. And this was spy technology that was developed by Israel, that is now used in Mexico. I forget what it was called with the name of Titan. It was Titan software. But the cartels are becoming terrifyingly advanced, man.
Yeah, they have the money. They have the money to hire, X this and X that, and bring them in. And you have that. You have ex-soldiers and you have ex-officers and that come in there, people that come out of the intel community and other things, enticed by the money.
Right.
Because they'll pay them anything. And there are a lot of people that just look at this problem and say, the only way this is ever going to stop is if Americans stop the consumption of these illicit drugs, which is probably not going to happen. So as long as there is consumption, there is going to be a way to supply and provide and profit from that. And it's a scary thing.
It is. Well, David Morehouse, thank you so much for your time. We just did about 4 hours.
Yay.
That was fun. For the Patreon people, we are probably not going to do a post show because it's late as but we did do a pre-show before this. We did some talking before the podcast started. So Go back and watch that on Patreon. It'll be linked below. And then, David, where can people find your website and your videos and your books, all that stuff?
davidmorehouse.org. And you can get to that website. That'll steer you to the YouTube channel because I can never remember the address for that. But there's an official website, an official YouTube channel where this will be and everything else as well as for you. So davidmorehouse.org.
Perfect. All right, man. Thanks again.
Yeah,
And
my pleasure.
good night, world.
Drink goat fuel.
Go fuel, baby.